Give me big old buckets of butter beer. Give me big old barrels of butter beer. Give me the drink I love so dear. And another round for my friend right here of the sweet old butter beer.
Welcome to the Three Broomsticks. We invite you to pull up a chair, grab a butterbeer, and settle in for a hearty discussion about Harry Potter. I'm Aurelia Lieb.
I'm Sophia Jenkins.
And I'm Irvin Cateman. And I am so excited to introduce our guest for today's episode. It's Charles Boyd. Hey, Charles.
Hi.
Glad to be here. You know, I am a writer, historian, current history PhD student. I'll be going back to teaching history in the fall at the college level after a 2.5-year hiatus now. But, I've been a Potterhead for most of my life, and I'm super excited about this. I've actually been excited all year, so I'm happy to dive into it.
Yes, and we've been excited to get you on all year because, yes, this was a brainchild when Charles and I met back in November at a convention, and I was like, we need you on this podcast. So, Charles, why don't you tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your Hogwarts house, favorite books, characters, and so on?
Oh, cool. So, my Hogwarts house, my Great Pyrenees, Wendell, and I are both Hufflepuffs. I think, most big dogs are, but yeah, Wendell, I have a shirt I'm wearing right now that says my Patronus is a Great Pyrenees. But yeah, I am a Hufflepuff. My favorite book is Goblet of Fire. I will just say I give Chamber of Secrets runner-up status for second favorite, which I just thought was interesting to mention because apparently it's a lot of people's least favorite. Let's see. My favorite character, it's sort of a tie between Dumbledore, Hagrid, and the twins, and I'll give Hermione an honorable mention. In terms of my journey to Potter, so you could say I sort of took the scenic route. I was first exposed to it, second grade teacher reading Philosopher's Stone to the class in second grade, but I was intrigued by it, but it took me a while to become a hardcore fan, and I think that, a lot of people will say, their interest in it peaked when they were kids. It was really the opposite for me because when I was a young kid, it honestly was hard to get really into the series because even the first few books are actually pretty dark. I think that, Rowling kind of made the point about, people remember Philosopher's Stone as being super lighthearted, but it does open with a double homicide, and so as I got older, I started getting more and more into it. My first midnight release was 2003, Order of the Phoenix. But, with some there are some childhood series that I like for nostalgic reasons, and the storytelling or world building flaws get more apparent the older I get. With Harry Potter, it really is the opposite because obviously, anytime, you look back at something for the latest time, you're going to notice the occasional flaw that you didn't catch before. But overall, Harry Potter keeps getting better and better for me because there's more and more stuff that I notice as an adult. So that's sort of been my journey to Potter. And as of, for quite a few years now, it's been one of my quote unquote special interests as an autistic person, which is actually one of the ways, I have no idea if this was intentional. I kind of doubt it, but for about a decade, I've sort of seen Hermione as a fellow autistic person, and I think that Hogwarts of History is kind of her special interest, to use some ASD related jargon.
I kind of love that.
Kind of makes sense.
I'm glad to hear it. She's not a character that necessarily a lot of people read as neurodivergent, at least in my experience, but I definitely do.
Well, we are very, very happy to have you with us, because today, for episode 39, we've gathered to discuss Law and Order in the Wizarding World. And I should clarify, the concept, not the TV show. Our Law and Order SVU crossover will have to wait for one of us to watch it. This topic actually came about because, Charles, you were on a panel at Conjuration, which was the convention I went to last November. And I went to the panel and it was amazing. Like, I took all these notes. And then afterwards, I think I cornered you outside the panel room and we like talked for another hour. And I was like, I feel like there's a podcast in here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the panel and the conversation with Irvin afterward were really my favorite parts of the convention. I mean, it was that was so awesome. And yeah, I think part of it for me was capital punishment. I mean, I was a weird kid, but like that was actually one of the very first political issues I took a position on as a kid, and so that's something, the whole how that gets sort of addressed in fantasy literature was always kind of interesting to me. And so that was sort of the issue of the death penalty in Harry Potter was sort of what I did the panel on. And I had a lot of fun with that and meeting Irvin and everything.
Yeah, it was great. So listeners, we have a bit of recommended reading for you. It's a very old essay of mine. It's part of a trilogy of essays that I wrote about the theme of revenge in Harry Potter. And it's part 3 of that trilogy, which I called Harry's Mercy. So that addresses Harry sparing Pettigrew's life, which we're going to be getting into a lot throughout this podcast. So yeah, give that a read.
And a huge thanks to Shruka over on our Patreon, who bought us this round of drinks at the pub.
Yay, thank you, Shruka!
We love us some drinks. If you would like to buy us a round at the pub, head over to patreon.com/3broomsticks with the numeral 3 to sign up. We're offering bonus content, chats with the host, and on-episode shoutouts to our patrons. And there has been a lot of Patreon content recently, so do go check it out. I think the most recent one is a discussion between Sierra and Irvin about Harry Potter, was it board games, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, oh my god. So, fun story. So, Sierra and I recorded that about a month ago, so I think like end of April or early May. And so, as part of our discussion on Harry Potter board games, we lamented how in the, like, ever-loving hell is there not a Harry Potter Monopoly? Literally a week after we recorded it, May 10th, in the year of our Lord, 2024, Harry Potter Monopoly was released.
Wow.
You willed it.
We fucking manifested that.
That seems to be the case.
And so, fun fact, my copy arrived yesterday, so after I'm done recording here, a friend's coming over to break in Harry Potter Monopoly.
Nice.
That sounds awesome.
I have a very Wizarding World themed day today.
I have to say, when I listened to your discussions about board games, I went between, oh yeah, I remember this game too. Ooh, that sounds actually really cool. Why have I never heard of this game? So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. And we would really appreciate your help in keeping the lights on at the Three Broomsticks so we can talk about Harry Potter for a long time to come. And listeners, you know the drill. I want to raise a toast because we are in a bar. At least we pretend to be.
Yes, I am raising my purple yam iced latte because we are recording early today.
I was going to say, we're not recording late enough for me to have brought out alcohol, so...
In fairness, I feel like a purple yam iced latte is a very Wizarding World drink. It's like nice and purple and everything.
Yeah. I agree.
Definitely.
Sorry, carry on.
So this toast raising that we're doing is for the comments on episode 36, which was another episode on our series of episodes about Cormoran Strike. So it was a crossover episode. And this one was particularly about the book parallels between book 5 and 7 with both book 5 and 7 for both series. And I believe you two, Sophia, Irvin, you were on this episode.
We were.
Yeah, it was fun.
Another excellent strike episode. And we want to raise our glasses, so put your purple drinks up into the air, to the absent-minded Raven, who said, "The whole Harry using the Cruciatus thing was always annoyed me. I get this book 5 attempt because he's got so many conflicting emotions at that point. He doesn't know which way is up. I don't like it, but I get it. The book 7 scenario is just badly justified. Harry's hot-headed, not cold-blooded, and he knows nothing of of the Carrow twins, whichever one this is. I can't tell the difference, which says a lot. It's presented as defending McGonagall, but that's righteous anger again, and it should have been just as ineffective as it was against Bellatrix.
Yeah, that part always bothered me too.
Same.
Yeah, I think for me, what always seemed kind of weird about it was, I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but that's another sort of issue with it. But the thing that always seemed weird to me was, you know, I know that Harry and McGonagall had, you know, a bond, but it was a little hard for me to swallow that he would be more angry on McGonagall's behalf, especially while she was still breathing, than he would be on behalf of Sirius having just died. You know, so like the being able to manifest it in the second case, but not the first, just seemed a little bit odd.
So I've an answer for that. So I think those two aren't happening in a vacuum. I think by the time he cast the Cruciatus Curse on Amicus, he has had a day. Like, first of all, he's, like, been on the run for, like, a year. He's, like, escaped with his life every other month and, like, has the scars to prove it. He got up before dawn, broke into Gringotts, like, escaped on a dragon, like, got to Hogwarts, nearly died, like, 10 times, saw the DA and what's been happening to them. And so Harry's nerves are just a little bit raw at this point. So, like, I never liked, but I kind of understood why, like, he cast the Cruciatus. Because, like, really, he's just, at wit's end at that point. It actually always bothered me a lot more that McGonagall approved of it, because that seemed wildly out of character.
She didn't really approve of it. Like, I don't think it was completely clear that she approved of it.
She called it gallant. That's, like, you know, very complimentary from a Gryffindor.
I mean, sure, that's true. But she thought it was dumb. She thought it was like, why on earth did you do that? But I think she was touched.
Isn't that also a compliment for a Gryffindor?
Sure.
Like, you did something brave but stupid. Well done. A+.
I guess. I saw it more as, like, she was honored that he felt so strongly that he wanted to protect her, but like was like, why did you do that? That was, so maybe that's just a Gryffindor-esque thing. I think it is a different emotion though. Like with Sirius, I think it was like, sure, there's anger, but there's like a lot of grief and shock and like denial, and like there are all of these other emotions in there, whereas I think with McGonagall it was more like straight up anger. So maybe that's why the Cruciatus Curse was easier. I think when I read this in the past, I was like, okay, he just spit on her, like it's not even like he like physically attacked her or something like that. But then, on the streets of New York, I had a random man lean over and spit in my face, like deliberately spit in my face.
I'm very sorry, by the way.
Ew.
Thank
sorry
you,
that you went
because
through
it
that.
was
Awful.
horrible. It was horrible. It's like so... it was just so violating, like, you know, violating in like a way that I couldn't really explain. And like, I just like immediately like burst into tears because I was just like, this is so horrible. So after that, I was like, yeah, I do actually kind of get it a little bit. I was like, okay, like it is different because it's just like so disrespectful. It's like almost, it's different even than like if he slapped her or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is an interesting point. Yeah, I'm very sorry that you went through that. I've never been through that exactly, but I can kind of imagine that would feel very violating. So I think that's a very good point drawn from personal experience.
Well, well done, Absent-Minded Raven. As always, we love to see your comments. And I'm sure that the whole Harry casting Cruciatus thing will be something we return to again and again and again on this podcast. I feel like it's one of those moments where Harry Potter fans love to talk through it. But let's get on into our main discussion. So all about the law and the order, or lack thereof, in the Wizarding world. And I feel like we can start with a sexy transition right into the Unforgivables.
I know, right? It's almost as if I teed all of this up.
Hey!
So I thought when I thought about this topic, which is an excellent topic, I was like, well, we probably need to establish what are the laws of the And I think we're just going to keep to the British wizarding world because we don't really know too much about the other ones. And I think we're probably more likely to be in team Let's Ignore Fantastic Beasts.
Yeah. Sort of as a caveat, we are discussing the British wizarding world because that's what we have the scope for.
Yeah.
That's where we know slightly more about this topic. So actually I was like, oh yeah, so there are 3 unforgivable curses. But funny enough, there's never like a clear mention of that it is forbidden to kill people. I assume we can sort of, from context, know that is forbidden. Mm-hmm. But it's not really mentioned specifically.
Yeah. There are like other ways to kill people without Avada Kedavra. So like...
Exactly.
I presume that like sort of basic laws apply, like in the wizarding world, like you're not allowed to kill people, you're not allowed to rob people, like, you're not allowed to randomly punch people in the face, sort of all those. And so I feel like where the Ministry of Magic shines is sort of like the laws beyond like what is expected of a reasonable society.
Sure. But I think one question I have is sort of in terms of like accidental death and stuff, like, okay, Harry didn't stun Stan Shunpike. Oh my god, that's a tongue twister. He didn't stun Stan Shunpike because he said, he was like, if you stun him from that height, he's gonna fall and he's gonna die. Like, we don't really see much in terms of like, okay, there are so many possible ways that you can cause injury and death in the wizarding world, even with non-illegal spells. So like, I'm kind of curious about what their rules are for like different types of accidental deaths, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think the unforgivable curses are unforgivable because like there's no way around it. Sort of like, if you cast Defendo and like you happen to chop off someone's head, like, you can't outlaw Defendo. It has practical uses. Avada Kedavra, I'm like, no, there's no way you like cast that on someone and there's a practical use.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that's what that classification is about.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. It's quite interesting, sort of still mulling over what Sophia just said, considering also they have a sport where, realistically that sport is quite violent. So I'm almost like thinking, do you, by just sort of participating in Quidditch, accept that injury is going to happen to you?
Yeah, everyone like signs a waiver before they start playing.
Yeah. But I mean, especially like we know the Slytherins like to play dirty sometimes and just, be like, well, I know this is going to get me a foul, but what's going to happen if I knock out the other player? Mm-hmm. Right. They're still knocked out. I'm going to get a penalty. That's 10 points if that person makes it. It's not really a like cost at the grand scheme of thing.
It reminds me, there's this great moment in Sea of Monsters, the second Percy Jackson book, where Tantalus is like putting in some like violent new camp games, and he's like, and no killing other players. If you do, you'll get no dinner for a week.
I mean, honestly, that would probably be enough to deter me. I mean,
that's fair. Yeah.
Isn't that even the case in the first Percy Jackson book with the capture the flag? And it was like, no maiming, otherwise you lose dessert privileges. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
That would definitely deter me. But
yeah, honestly, that would deter me more.
Like, even in, I guess even in the Muggle world, there are sort of some different rules for sports. Like, some of the things that are okay in football, if you just randomly did them to someone on the street, that you would probably like be arrested for assault. So like, and people do get seriously injured in football. So I wonder if Quidditch is similar. It's like, okay, within the rules of the game, like anything you do is fine. Like, you're not gonna get in like trouble with the law for even seriously injuring someone during Quidditch.
So do we think there's sort of like, if I went to, well, I'm going to pretend to be a really horrific person. If I went to a Quidditch game as a player and I pulled out my wand and used, let's go back to Irvin's example, I used Defendo and cut off someone's, I don't know, arm or head or whatever. would at that point...
The arm carrying the quaffle being like, I got possession, you guys!
Okay. I know this is not the question you're asking, but you're not allowed to have your wand. You're not allowed to use your wand on the Quidditch field, so it's not within the rules of the game, so I think it would be... you would get in trouble for that.
Yeah.
But if you hit a bludger at someone...
the other team would get a foul. They'd be able to make a goal with their one remaining arm.
One thing that occurs to me that might be relevant here is in Prisoner of Azkaban, I was just rereading this scene recently. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle dress up as Dementors to basically try to get Harry to fall off of his broom during the Quidditch game. And McGonagall, he casts a Patron. And I think Flint also participates. And McGonagall is very angry. But it's very much presented as, okay, detention and you lose points from Slytherin. She's not really acting like they just tried to kill Harry. I mean, I do wonder if the fact that they can heal most injuries instantly and, you can use a spell to keep somebody from falling in midair, I do wonder if that sort of mitigates how severe the punishment is going to be, but it does seem to suggest that doing stuff that's cheating, because I believe with that scene, Slytherin wasn't even playing, but, doing stuff that's cheating during Quidditch can, if it carries a risk of injury, can get you in trouble, but not as much trouble as, McGonagall isn't really talking to them as though they just tried to kill somebody.
I don't read it as them trying to kill somebody. I mean, I read it as a silly prank done by some 13-year-olds. They want to, distract Harry and, freak him out. And, they'd be happy if he fainted, but, he fainted during the last Quidditch match and he was fine. So, I don't really see it as an actual attempt to murder Harry. I think it's, a dumb prank, and they're just hoping, at the very least, to distract him from catching this snitch, maybe to get him scared or to faint, or just, I don't really think it's an attempted murder.
Yeah, I think I agree, especially since that is also the same book where Malfoy deliberately antagonizes a hippogriff, which could have ended much worse for him than it did.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And it's I just wanted to, give Hagrid a hard time. But he didn't really think through what actually could have happened for him.
So Sophia and I have been disagreeing about this for years now.
Yes.
It's been fun. So my perspective is that Draco, was 100% trying to, get Harry to plummet 50 feet, possibly to his doom. But I feel like McGonagall's also grading on the curve of, well, you're 13, and, you're dumb. And so, I think part of it is the methods. Yes, you were doing a shitty thing, but you were doing it in less shitty a way. I feel like if, Draco had been casting spells at Harry to try to get him killed, then McGonagall would be a lot more upset about it. But she's who does this? You're such a little shit. But, because he wasn't, actually doing anything violent to Harry, I feel like that sort of mitigates the punishment for McGonagall.
I mean, here's a crazy thing to think about. I just thought of this, but unless I've got my order of stuff way wrong, Neville lost Hogsmeade privileges all year for something that was really mostly the fault of Hogwarts having shitty security, with the passwords. Mm-hmm. Malfoy is in Hogsmeade, I think, a chapter or two later. So it seems like Neville got in more trouble than Malfoy did, which is a little bit, I mean, I'll say this, I mean, it does speak to McGonagall not favoring houses, but, it does seem like Malfoy, I don't think he was actively trying to kill Harry. I would be harder on Flint, because Flint was basically an adult at that point, but I think that...
But he dumb.
Oh, yeah, no, he's dumber than a box of rocks, it seems like, but I think that it was one of those things where I don't think Malfoy was trying to kill Harry, but I think that he was being incredibly cavalier about possibly, very seriously hurting him. And I mean, honestly, the thing with Malfoy, I don't think the character's pure evil, but he is a pretty horrible kid. I mean, I'm just gonna, I mean, it's not 100% his fault, but he is, I think, Irvin, you call him in a recent podcast a little shit?
Yes, I call him that a lot.
That does not sound like Irvin at all.
I would probably never say that about a real life human kid. But
I have many times.
I would.
I'm so surprised.
I would say that if Malfoy thinks that dressing up as a Dementor is enough to make Harry faint, then he's really dumb. And he might be that dumb, but maybe Professor McGonagall is giving Malfoy the benefit of the doubt of believing he's not that dumb, because truly, it's not like Harry just looks at someone in a black robe and is just like, oh, I'm gonna faint now. It's like everybody knows that when Dementors are actually there, the effect they have on everybody, not just Harry, is this miserable depression, fear, all of these negative emotions. So everybody knows that Harry looking at these random people dressed in black robes is not gonna have the same effect as.
Could you imagine though, in a school where black robes is the school uniform?
Is the school uniform?
That would be a problem.
That's really funny.
Yeah. Well, also you think about Dumbledore and he's referenced as being at that game. Dumbledore had specifically, kind of, I think, warned the Dementors not to be at the game again. And it is kind of funny. I think somebody kind of pointed this out, I think, on Wizarding World. The most powerful wizard in the world basically says, if I see a Dementor here, there's going to be problems. And so, and this kind of goes back to, I think, the frontal lobes are still in development, but it is kind of funny that their first thought was, okay, the most powerful wizard in the world said, if I see a Dementor here, there's going to be problems, so let's dress up as Dementors. I mean, that could have also, I'm sure Dumbledore would have felt really badly, but you have no idea at that point what kind of spell he's going to use on them. I mean, if he had actually thought they were, I mean, suffice it to say, it was basically, I think, some teenagers really, A, being malicious, but B, really not thinking things through, which seems to be a common theme with Malfoy.
Yeah, it's not his finest hour.
Yeah. I think though that it is quite interesting that, because I think Hogwarts almost is a pocket of its own where, the teachers have a lot of the jurisdiction. And I think there's a lot to be said about the house point system and how inconsistent that seems to be, and also the degree of punishments that are meted out. Because I would also like to know if stuff like forbidding Hogsmeade wizards, if that is something that your head of house could veto, if another teacher was like, oh, this is your punishment, and your head of house could step in. But it's never really clear of if they have a scale. And I think the answer is probably they don't, and they just do whatever they feel is right in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, so I'm, this is just sort of my own fandom, thing. I like McGonagall. I like Dumbledore. I think they have a lot of flaws. Dumbledore is one of my favorite characters, and I just kind of like McGonagall, which is, I think, the opposite of where a lot of the fandom is, especially online. Because I think a lot of the fandom online really hates Dumbledore and really, really loves McGonagall. But, I don't think if Dumbledore had been the one deciding how to handle, this is just strictly speculative, I think if Dumbledore had been the one who was specifically tasked with handling the password security breach thing with Neville, I don't think he would have come down as hard on Neville as McGonagall did, but I also think it is not his administrative style to tell McGonagall that she's overreacting. And again, this is all 100%, but I don't think McGonagall had to get approval from Dumbledore to issue a punishment like that. It seems like he gives the heads of house a lot of a lot of leeway. And honestly, one of the biggest, because I consider him as an administrator not great, but above replacement. But I think he's above replacement level in terms of, I would put him above Dippet and above McGonagall, which again is like, kind of breaks the internet. But I think that one of his flaws as an administrator, honestly, is giving teachers like McGonagall to an extent and Snape to a much greater extent really too much leeway with making disciplinary decisions when honestly they're, in a lot of cases, not level-headed enough about it.
Sorry, not to cut this off, but I think maybe we want to save Hogwarts and its discipline system for another podcast.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
That will be its own podcast. We could get into it. But yeah, let's leave Hogwarts as a pocket all its own in our little justice system, and get back to, society at large's laws in the Ministry, because we've gotten through one so far. It's going great, y'all.
Yeah. I did wonder, going back to the 3 Unforgivables, if there was other dark magic that we think was similar, like forbidden.
And I don't think it's as clear-cut forbidden. I think it's sort of context. Unforgivables are unforgivable when cast against a fellow wizard, because there's sort of no justification for killing fellow wizards. Except when there is, which we'll get into. Whereas, I think dark magic against fellow wizards would be considered verboten, but maybe not in sort of as blanket a way as the quote unforgivable curses. I think the other dark magic is very rarely forgivable.
Yeah, I think there's and this is potentially a connection to another ban that we have further down in the doc, which is about the experimental breeding. So that's obviously testing stuff out and doing things that is not tested, confirmed, we know what it's doing. But then I think creating a basilisk would probably fall more under dark magic, and I don't think if we have confirmation, but I assume that is forbidden.
That would probably be its own statute issued by the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. The Wizarding World seems to have, very, very specific rules for very specific instances. I'm thinking of Quidditch where there are 700 fouls.
Oh, yeah.
Don't turn your opponent's head into a pineapple. And then there's a separate foul, don't turn your opponent's head into a coconut. And, there'd be, 48 fouls, each saying not to turn your opponent's head into a fruit. So I feel sort of the laws are probably the same, where they're there's just a law, Section 14.2a says don't breed basilisks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is probably similar then to how, how the UK versus most of the other European countries write their laws, where and I think the US does it the same way as the UK does, where it's something happened, so we had to come up with a law, versus in Germany it's more sort of, so these are all the things we could think of, and this is what the laws we came up with, and then if something new happens that we didn't anticipate, we decide in a moment.
Yeah.
So it sounds a bit like the Wizarding World is oh, this happened, how are we dealing with this?
Yeah, it's when I was looking at a code of conduct one time when I first started teaching at the university level, and there was a thing that said, with fraternity rules, it said no scavenger hunts, and I'm okay, I'm going to say that this is probably based on a specific incident that happened. I think that's kind of how it works with a lot of the stuff in the Wizarding World, is it does seem like it's just so specific that it seems okay, there's probably some sort of story here.
Yeah. So the British comedian Michael McIntyre has a fantastic bit about how he was at a pool and there was a sign at the pool of, please don't swim if you have active diarrhea. And he's first of all, the qualifier active is doing so much. And second of all, there is a story behind that sign.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet.
Yeah. So, yeah, I feel that is the vibe the Wizarding World gives off, is all of these rules have a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, I wonder for the unforgivable curses, to me, it feels like they made these like rules for the unforgivable curses because they didn't want to have to deal with trials and context and like any of that, that they just made it like, okay, you used an unforgivable curse and you're going to go to Azkaban for your whole life. And I wonder if that rule was made like during the first Wizarding War when they just like didn't want to have to deal with any of the trials or anything. They're just like, okay, we saw this person use the Cruciatus curse, they're going to Azkaban for life. We saw this person do this. Like, it feels like that to me, that it's like a way to get around having to do any trials.
Sorry to disagree, but the unforgivable curses were actually outlawed and made unforgivable, I think, in the 1690s or like 1707, like within a few years of the Statute of Secrecy.
Is this is a Pottermore thing?
No, I think it's a Goblet of Fire thing.
Really?
They were first classified as unforgivable in 1717. Okay. Beetle the Bard. That's where it is in Dumbledore's notes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that disproves my theory, but I think it is interesting to think about, like, it seems like in the wizarding world, I don't know, there's just like, if we think about more the order side of Law and Order, there's just like, it seems very like non-forgiving, which is ironic with unforgivable curses, but like there's not, it's not like, oh, it's a minimum sentence of this, and then you like figure out within the trial where the sentence is. It's like, okay, you did this thing, you're going to Azkaban for life.
Yeah. I think once we run down the laws, like, I definitely want to get into, like, the sort of crime and punishment aspect of the society, because that's sort of, like, what's really interesting. Because, their system leaves a lot to ponder.
Big time.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dementor's kiss, in a lot of ways, is more brutal than really what a lot of societies, even some that still have capital punishment in the Muggle world, do. And Azkaban sounds like basically a torture chamber.
Mm-hmm. So, Aureo, do you want to finish running down the laws?
Yeah.
Because we're up to the third one.
So already touched upon this just now, is the International Statute of Secrecy from 1692. I was sort of wondering, how international is this really? Like, is it really a worldwide thing, or is it like 2 countries participate, so it's international? I don't know.
No, it seems to be sort of like everyone in the International Confederation of Wizards. Like, I think it's kind of like, like the UN like has decreed that like this is what's up.
Okay, but that could mean that we have pockets where it doesn't apply.
There could be. I imagine wizarding society at large would probably frown upon those pockets and try to like, stamp them out.
I mean, if you think about it, there are parts of the Muggle world where traditional cultures of different types of sort of witchcraft, like mysticism, whatever, still exist and are sort of integrated with whatever culture they're part of. So it might be that like in the wizarding world is like integrated with the Muggle world in certain places.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that too. I like that idea too. That's a really intriguing theory.
I know we're talking like more sort of consequences and stuff later, but that doesn't seem to be like hard and fast rules of what happens if you break international statute of secrecy. And the prominent example that we see is obviously Harry blowing up Aunt March, which I don't know what would have happened if you were not Harry Potter. So if some other kid had done that,
I feel like for a 13-year-old, like they'd still be like, no, shame on you. But like it clearly like wasn't a deliberate thing. Like you sort of can't help, your temper bursting out of you magically.
The more deliberate thing is when Harry and Ron take the flying car and are seen by all these muggles. But they're still 12. So it's like, yeah, it was very deliberate, but also they're 12-year-olds.
And very panicked 12-year-olds. I mean, it's kind of one of those things, from the context of the scene, that there's the platform is not working, and it seems to be a rare enough event that there's no known emergency procedure for it. So they seem to make a snap decision that they, out of panic, that they very much regret 6 hours later.
Which, talk of what we were saying earlier, how much you want to bet that starting in 1993, there is a sign on platform 9 3/4, if you can't get through the platform, please write an owl to Hogwarts care of Minerva McGonagall now, and do not go anywhere.
Yes.
One would certainly hope that they did that. I mean, it is honestly, Dumbledore and McGonagall seem to be a little bit cavalier about the platform not working, but yeah, you hope that there was a sign on platform 9 3/4 warning people about that.
We call it the Thank the Weasleys Act.
Probably a little, on the back of your ticket, a little, alert, if you can.
Yeah, exactly.
I think all the letters in the future were don't forget, train leaves on the 1st of September, be there early, do not leave this to the last minute.
Well, they clearly don't do that because Harry is never in his life early to the train. No. Every year he's like, oh my god, it's 10:59 in 20 seconds, better run. Which, man after my own heart.
How I know that. Well, talking about kids and teenagers, there's then obviously the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery from 1875, which, is one of the ones where I'm like, it's nice to have this written down, but we know how unreliable they are at finding out.
Yeah, there is no earthly way you can enforce that.
Yeah. So I'm more sort of like a code of honors. Just please don't do this.
It's if we catch you, you're in big trouble.
And if in the unlikely circumstance that there was a house elf around, we still catch you, though.
Sucks to suck.
Already mentioned this. There's the ban of experimental breeding, which we mostly learn about because Hagrid and Blast entered screwed.
I feel like it's a good law. It's a law we all should follow.
Yeah, it makes sense, that law. Another one I found was the Code of Wand Use, which is mostly saying that only humans are allowed to use wands, which is a fun law. And it's from 1631.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Law created by humans. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, so two interesting things about that one. First is that it literally predates the statute of secrecy. So I wonder if, the reason it says human rather than wizard is because they were like, I mean, if a muggle gets a wand, it's not technically against our rules, because back then it wouldn't have been. So that just shows how old this law is. Second of all, how does that work with interspecies marriages? If someone's grandmother was a house elf, are they allowed a wand?
I mean, I think precedent, if we look at people in the wizarding world, is yes, because I think Flitwick is part house elf, right?
Part goblin.
Sorry, part goblin. We have Fleur Delacour, who's part Vila. We have Hagrid, who's part giant. So I think as long as you have some human in you and you have magical powers, then you are considered allowed to use a wand.
Okay. So non-human doesn't mean you have to be fully human. It just means you have to have some human in you.
Yeah, I think so.
But there is that law that, where they managed to piss off all the centaurs and the mer people.
Right. I mean, it is interesting. I personally believe that centaurs... Okay, we won't get into this. we can talk about it some other time. I don't think that centaurs are half human, half horse, as in a human and a horse mated. I think they are a completely separate, like, separate thing.
Yeah.
And so, like Umbridge calls them, like, half-breeds or whatever, but I don't think they are. So I think they're considered completely non-human.
Yeah.
Yeah, as much as the idea of Catherine the Great sort of being the mother of all centaurs originally.
Wait, how have I not heard that before?
As much as that would
That's amazing.
As much as that would be cool, I got to agree with Sophia here that it's unlikely.
Oh my god. Sorry, I'm just still enjoying that. That's brilliant.
I aim to please, thank you.
Oh, man. All right. So those are sort of like the big picture laws that we have on the books. Sort of like, don't use magic in front of muggles, don't use magic if you're a kid, don't use magic if you're not human. But then we have a few like more specific laws on the books, more for the nitty gritty than the all around everyday.
Yeah, so there's a degree for justifiable confiscation. There we go. Which we mostly see because Dumbledore's will is being investigated for the full 31 days by the Ministry before Harry, Ron, and Hermione get their possessions out of the will?
bequests.
There we go. So that it seems like a law where there's a story, I feel like.
I mean, more like that's a law where there were a lot of court cases.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a very specific one that we really only see once. And then there's the Muggle Protection Act, which we get mentioned in Book 2, and it's the reason why the Ministry conducted the raids, so forcing Lucius Malfoy to go to Bergen and Berks and sell some family items.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very specific one. And then I've just listed some other ones. So there's the guidelines for the treatment of non-wizard part humans, which I think just gets mentioned like once. So
yeah.
There's the international ban on dueling, which seems like a sensible rule to have.
Definitely.
Yeah. The registry of prescribed charmable objects, which we mostly learn about through Arthur's job. And then I think something that gets mentioned because of the Lupin is a werewolf code of conduct.
Sorry, back to the international ban on dueling. How's that work? So, like, in the Muggle world, ban on dueling means, like, no pistols at dawn. Like, that's not allowed. But what separates a duel from just, like, two people casting spells at each other?
See, I would almost say, like, if it's, like, an organized, like, dueling, like, event, like, the dueling club that we briefly saw at Hogwarts, it's probably fine. It is probably actually those non-organized fights, basically.
I'm imagining it as similar to Muggles, as in, like, when people were like, oh, you have insulted my honor, we are going to duel to the death. Like, I'm imagining something like that. Like, if it's, like, two people for fun, like, practicing spells at each other, I don't think that's the same. I think it's, like, when you're saying, okay, one of us is gonna die, like...
Yeah. Right, like the who's your second?
Exactly.
Oh, 11-year-old, who's your second? All right. Yeah, so them's the laws. So now we can actually get into sort of how they interact with everyday life. And this is sort of the interesting part. And Aureo, you've actually done a lot on the, like, who enforces the laws beyond, like, the vague answer of the Ministry.
Yeah. And you know what? I thought, like, it'd be really good to understand this. And even after adding all of these points to the document, I'm not sure I 100% understand it. So please help me out.
We'll do our best.
So I think the first one that was easy enough to understand is probably the ones at the bottom of the whole, like, line is the Auros as the executive of, like, actually bringing people in and hunting down Death Eaters. So I think that part is potentially the most clear one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the Auras are part of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement.
Yep.
So that is, I found something that said that is a bit of a wizarding equivalent of both the Muggle police force and the judiciary. So they were comparing it to the Home Office of Muggle Britain.
Okay.
So they're saying basically this is the department that rules all the other department at the ministry. I'm not sure we're technically having real evidence of that being the case, but we also don't really have real evidence of that not being the case, I guess.
Okay, so R's are a subsection of that, right? It's not like all of the department.
Yeah.
So R's are specifically for like the worst of the worst. Like they aren't going for minor infractions of the law. They're going for like the certified baddies.
The Auras are essentially the National Guard.
Yeah. Okay. So then there are other Department of Law Enforcement members who might go because someone did something.
Doesn't
broke a minor law. Okay.
There's someone who mentions the accidental magical reversal squad. I think the people who deal with Aunt Marge. So they're also part of the Department of
Law Enforcement. Okay.
Yeah.
The National Guard thing is interesting. I don't necessarily disagree, but I always sort of thought of Aurors as more the equivalent of like the FBI or Scotland Yard. But that
makes a lot of sense.
It's a little National Guard makes sense too. It's a little bit tricky because when they talk about a wizarding war, they don't seem to distinguish between police and military branches of government, so I can see the National Guard argument too.
Well, they don't seem to have a police so much. They just sort of have like different levels of the Department of Law Enforcement, and sort of based on severity, they sort of send out the different the different levels.
Like it doesn't seem like there's anyone who's just like going around patrolling in Diagon Alley or in Hogsmeade or any of the magical places just to like see if anyone breaks the law or whatever. It seems like you go to the ministry and sometimes you're doing desk work and sometimes you're being sent out to different places to arrest people or do whatever.
I did find a mention of subdivisions that had the Aura Office, the Improper Use of Magic Office, as we already said, but then also a Magical Law Enforcement Patrol.
In Order of the Phoenix, when they are welcoming people to the ministry, they say Department of Magical Law Enforcement, including the Improper Use of Magic Office, Auror Headquarters, and Wizengamot Administration Services. So those seem to sort of be like the three main subsets of law enforcement.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, the law enforcement department, which includes like the behind the scenes stuff, as well as like the lower level, responders. You have the Aurors, who are, the high level FBI, if you will. And then you have the Wizengamot, which is the judiciary. Mm-hmm.
So then I found that the Minister for Magic, is it Ulik Gamp?
Yep.
His greatest legacy was founding this Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and at that point we already had the Wizengamot and the Council of Magical Law, so they were the first subdivisions of this department. So basically he was like, these two things should maybe work together.
Mm-hmm.
Which then brings us into, what is the Wizengamot? And all I could find is essentially the High Court of Wizarding Law, and there is a head of the Wizengamot that we know is the Chief Warlock, and we know of this mostly because Dumbledore was that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't found anything more about the Wizengamot. It's one of those things where I'm like, it's a weird word, and I don't really know what to do with it.
I mean, it seems to be kind of their supreme court. Like, my understanding is, like, the Council of Magical Law just, like, is the judiciary, and then within that, the Wizengamot is the highest level.
So, I mean, it's made clear that it's very unusual that Harry gets tried by the whole Wizengamot for a case of underage magic. So, but it's not clear, like, at what level do you bring in the whole Wizengamot? Like, and who are the
corrupt level.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But in a system that was more functioning in the way it's supposed to be, it's not exactly clear. And like who goes on the lower levels? Is it just like, who are on the lower levels of trials, and like, are there juries? Are there like it's not like it's not very clear. I don't know.
There are juries because in the Pensieve trials, there is a mention of a jury.
That's
Yes,
true.
that
There is a
apparently
jury.
part of the
Yeah.
Council of Magical Law is basically the jury part, and then you can pull in the whizzing gamut if needed, is how I understood it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Harry, theoretically, if not for corruption, would have been tried by Madame Bones, I believe, and a jury, or just by Madame Bones. Like, I don't know what would have been the normal situation for him.
See, I think it would probably not have even been the jury, because it would have probably been such a standard sort of thing that you wouldn't have to bring it in front of a jury, but...
Yeah, like, or like you bring in, like, you know, sort of 5 members of the Wizengamot and, like, they vote whether to acquit or not.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it should have been a lot more understated.
And then also that brings up the question, do wizards have lawyers? Should they have lawyers?
So, this was somewhere later in the doc, but we can get into it. So, the thing about the trials that we see is that they are, like, 10 minutes long. Like, literally the ones in the Pensieve that we see, I think there's like 3 or 4 of them. It's like, you bring in the accused, and Crouch is like, you are accused of heinous crimes against the Longbottoms. What do you have to say for yourself? And the guy's like, I didn't do it. And they're like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how do you vote? Yeah. Sort of like, we're in and out. It's very snappy. Like, that's why Fudge is so annoyed when, like, during Harry's trial, Dumbledore takes up time with, like, stuff like defense and witnesses. And Fudge is like, I want this done today and, like, preferably before lunch. What are we doing here?
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
yeah.
I think we don't completely know if that is standard for during a time of peace, because we do know that, like, Crouch, with all of these sort of Death Eater trials during the First Wizarding War, you were lucky if you even got a trial. The trials were very performative. They were very much like, let's just get this done quickly. We all know these people are Death Eaters. So we don't really know what a trial looks like during a time of peace, not with a super corrupt person like Fudge. So it's possible they are a lot longer other times, but yeah, we have no evidence of that.
Yeah.
It's a bit murky because we don't really see a point. I think that's a very good point that you make. You know, it's interesting because we don't see a point where A, the wizarding world is not at war, and B, Fudge is not in charge. Because, you know, to your point, Sirius talking about being sent to Azkaban without a trial, the way that he talks about it, it certainly seems like that would be very unusual. On the flip side, Fudge very casually says that they're going to keep Hagrid in Azkaban just in case he did something that they have nowhere near enough evidence to convict him for. But that may be, as you sort of alluded to, or as all of you have alluded to, that may be sort of a Fudge thing. Like, you know, if Scrimgeour was in power when there wasn't a war, it's interesting to think about, like, how that would have gone.
But to rebut that, so we have sort of 3 people in charge that we see. We see Crouch Sr., you know, in Ye Olden Days. We see Fudge, and we see Scrimgeour. And literally every single one of them violates due process at least once and chucks someone in Azkaban without so much as a how do you do.
Yeah.
Crouch throws Sirius into Azkaban without a trial. Fudge has Barty Crouch Jr. kissed by a Dementor without anything. And Scrimgeour throws Stan Shunpike in jail without a trial. Which, like, again, same as Hagrid. Like, you know, sort of Stan Shunpike is suspected of doing this bad thing, just like Hagrid is. And so Scrimgeour, just like Fudge, is just, well, we have to be seen doing something, so we're going to throw you in Azkaban, and if we were wrong, we'll say sorry.
Yeah. And there seems to be no separation between jail and prison.
Oh, yeah.
It's like everyone gets thrown into prison even before... Yeah, it's like for Hagrid, like, you can imagine, okay, they've arrested him, they put him in some sort of holding place and then they are going to have a trial for him or something like that. But no, he just goes straight into Azkaban. There's no in-between, any sort of infraction, straight into Azkaban.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like, the degree of severity seems only in terms of, like, how long you're in Azkaban for. Like, you know, sort of, you know, jaywalks, you get a week in Azkaban. Like, you killed someone, you get life in Azkaban, but, like, it's still always Azkaban.
Yeah. So, this is potentially a question I should know the answer to, but what is the difference between jail and prison?
Ooh, can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and it's always funny to me, I was talking to a lawyer friend who said that it really throws him off when he's watching a show and they say you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life. Because typically if you go to jail for the rest of your life, something has gone horribly wrong and there might be a civil rights investigation. But with jail is typically used for either very short sentences for people who are awaiting trial, at which point it'll be determined whether they're acquitted or, you know, often sent to prison. Or in some cases, like, if I had 20 unpaid parking tickets, let's say, and I get pulled over, and the cop runs my license and notices I have 20 unpaid parking tickets, then they might take me to jail until the parking tickets are paid off. So jail is typically used for a combination of very low-level offenses and for people awaiting trial. Prison is for longer sentences, usually over a period of years after somebody's already been convicted. And without getting too much into details, there's been debates about whether or not you can force people to do labor as punishment while they're in jail if they haven't been convicted yet, because typically you're supposed to actually get convicted before you do that. So yeah, that's the prison versus jail thing, but they're very frequently used interchangeably in the US, which makes things kind of confusing, and I like catching it on TV shows when they mix them up.
Yeah, because not gonna lie, I thought they were synonyms, so I was like, oh, this is just the same thing.
Same. Like, I just learned a lot.
And also,
Thanks, cool.
With things like posting bail, like if you're in jail, like often you can pay bail and you can go home and wait for your trial at home instead of waiting in jail. Not always, but that's often an option.
That's a really good point too. Yeah, and it whereas obviously, like, you know, once you're in prison, you know, you're kind of just there. But yeah, that's a really good point too. I hadn't thought of the bail issue, but that's another key distinction. And I wonder if I guess the Wizarding World doesn't have that. Really?
Like a way where criminals can't pay to stay out of Azkaban? I feel like the Wizarding World has to have that.
Unofficially.
From everything we know of
it's the Lucius Malfoy addendum to something.
Probably so.
Be like, and if you pay enough, we'll not only let you out of Azkaban, we'll give you an Order of Merlin.
Oh, yeah.
And you can be minister. We'll throw that in.
Yeah. Actually, I want to go back to Scrimgeour tossing Stan Shunpike into jail. Because...
Into prison.
Like, this... Into prison. Sorry, into prison. Because it always seemed like such a dumb PR move. Like... Okay, I'm not saying this is, like, a good thing to do, but I feel like if it were Fudge, and, you know, with Harry, he has a sham trial, like, tries to get the Wizengamot to convict, and then it's like, well, you see, we, you know, had the accused go through the justice system, and, you know, we, as a society, have decided that he's guilty. And, like, that seems like a much better look than, like, you know, tossing Stan Shunpike into prison for a year without any kind of trial. And I'm sort of, like, curious why Scrimgeour wouldn't do that. Because, like, you know, clearly rigging trials is not, like, a difficult thing to do here.
I do wonder if Scrimgeour, I mean, as bad as his policies were, I do wonder if maybe Scrimgeour legit thought he was making people safer, and that he had somewhat good motives for doing bad things, as opposed to Fudge just only caring about PR. But, I mean, we do know Scrimgeour cares a lot about PR, so I don't know. But, like, I'm not sure. I think Scrimgeour's a bit more principled, because I'm not sure that Fudge would have let himself be tortured and killed rather than give Harry up.
I agree. So I think it's... Scrimgeour definitely has principles. Like, because, to your point, I think Scrimgeour genuinely thinks that it's very important to, like, keep people from being afraid and to make people feel like there's progress happening against Voldemort. Which, like, I feel like is a slightly more positive thing than Fudge just trying to cling to power. He's like, no, like, I like being a minister, so people shouldn't think Voldemort's back. So, like, you know, you can agree or disagree whether, like, having people feel safe is worth suspending due process. I would argue it's not. But it's coming from a better place, for sure, with Scrimgeour than it is with Fudge.
I agree with you there.
Yeah, I think it's implied that Scrimgeour goes to Azkaban without a trial, but I'm not actually sure that it's ever said that there's no trial. It's possible there was a sham trial.
So I was looking through Half-Blood Prince trying to figure it out, and it just says that Stan Shunpike was, like, arrested and is being held.
Yeah.
So, like...
So...
Yeah, I feel like, sort of, we would have heard about it if Stan Shunpike was convicted of anything.
I was just wondering, does the being held imply that maybe there is a jail?
Well, I don't think
no, because he's being held in Azkaban.
Yeah, and... Yeah. So it could be that theoretically the idea is, because people do get held in jail for a long time before trials happen. Like, this happens in the US too, in the Muggle world. So it might be that he's like, yeah, theoretically at some point in the future there will be a trial. And maybe he even knows that Stan will get off, and, like, but it's just the perception for right now is, oh, we caught someone, they're in Azkaban. And he wants that to be the news story, and he's hoping that by the time the trial comes around, people will have forgotten about it, and maybe he'll have caught some more real Death Eaters by then.
Right, we are scheduling the trial for 1 week after we catch a real Death Eater.
Exactly. So that, like, the news story will be lost.
I could totally see that. Absolutely. You know, and that's definitely a thing about trials getting delayed, and, you know, there's a lot of gray area when it says in the Bill of Rights that you have the right to a speedy trial. There's a lot of gray area there.
Yeah.
I love when one of you wrote, I think I wrote due process in the Wizarding World, and one of you, I think it was Irvin, but one of you wrote, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah, the whole due process thing in the Wizarding World seems sort of more a loose recommendation.
It's especially notable for Wizarding UK because the idea of the right to a jury trial in British history was a concept so much earlier than so many other societies. You know,
right, it was the Magna Carta in 1215, right?
Oh yeah, you know, and it was one of the reasons why, you know, England had a problem, but France didn't have this problem, where they both had super severe penalties for very petty crimes, and England had an issue where a lot of juries were essentially doing jury nullification so they wouldn't have to sentence people to death. Whereas France, it was a moot point because France just typically didn't have jury trials. You know, this is, you know, we're talking hundreds of years ago. So yeah, it is very notable how the Wizarding World comes off more like Muggle Russia when it comes to, you know, how trials are run.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of more understandable, if not a good look, when Crouch Sr. Did it. And he he essentially did what Lincoln did in a war. He suspended habeas corpus. But to Crouch's credit, and I've been spending a lot of time defending Barty Crouch Sr. this week, because we had a Father's Day meetup too, and I did not expect myself in this position. But Crouch, for all that throwing Sirius in jail without a trial is very, very shitty, Crouch does do trials for most of the Death Eaters and most of the miscreants he catches. I guess with Sirius, it was just such a, thing, and it was still, Well, actually, this is interesting, because all the trials we see Crouch do happen, well after Voldemort fell. Whereas Sirius was presumably, caught, November 1st, the day after Voldemort fell, and he's thrown in Azkaban without a trial. So do we think Sirius is more the norm for how things were in the preceding years, or was he the aberration?
I think he was more the norm because, and the thing with Lincoln is actually, I think I made a reference to this in the notes. I mean, it did remind me of some of the U.S. Civil War because, and I mean, some of the other stuff, that the government did during that time were, things like shutting down newspapers for, making statements that were probably free speech. But at the same time, I'm not defending it. At the same, it really reminds me of the Wizarding War, First and Second War, because the Confederacy were basically as evil as the Death Eaters, but just tactically stupider, and so it does kind of, it did kind of remind me of that because you're fighting some of the most, almost the most evil entity you can imagine. But it gets into questions of, okay, do the ends justify the means? And is it acceptable to, how much civil liberties short-circuiting is acceptable when you're doing that? But then it gets into also, I think, another thing that's very illustrative of, the a real world problem is that they're continuing, to Irvin's point, to short-circuit due process after the war is over. And I think what that's largely indicative of is that it's very hard to do, we talk about there's a lot of gray area in the term speedy. There's a lot of gray area when you're talking about a temporary reduction of civil liberties. There's a lot of gray area about what temporary means. And I think it's relatively rare for a government to restrict civil liberties in an emergency and then be very willing as soon as the emergency has subsided to say, okay, civil liberties are all back now. It's kind of, sometimes you have a hard time getting that toothpaste back in the tube. And I do think you see to some extent that Crouch is being very reluctant to kind of give up the power that he's taken on. And I mean, Sirius...
I don't agree with that.
Interesting. How come?
Because we see Crouch giving people trials after Voldemort falls. So Sirius was captured 24 hours after the war. So still very much sort of on war footing. But afterwards with, Karkaroff and Bagman and, the Lestranges and his son, Crouch does give them trials. He does do the due process for them. So I think Crouch actually, would prefer to do things the right way once the war is over.
I will say,
That's
I think those 3 trials are very specific. I think Karkaroff, because the reason he's going on trial is because he has information for the ministry. So they've already put him in Azkaban, and then they're deciding, is he going to stay there or not? So I think that needs to be a trial. I think Ludo Bagman, because he is so well known, such a celebrity, I think there would have been uproar if he hadn't gotten a trial. And I...
Can I just say, I f***ing love Bagman's trial.
It's so funny.
The jury would like to congratulate Mr. Bagman on that fabulous Quidditch game last week.
It's so funny. And then what Sirius says is like, yes, Crouch gave his son a trial, but it was mainly like a way to show everyone how much he hated the boy. And so we don't know exactly what about just an average Death Eater. Do they all get trials, or is it just like in specific cases?
That's a great point, because I thought of the thing Sirius's comments too, and I know he's biased, but I that does seem to suggest it may have been a special case. And I also think something that Irvin brought up earlier, the trials are very short. It does feel very rushed, but that may also just be what the wizarding world does all the time, regardless of who's in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also, in fairness, we got a story to get to. Harry can't just hang out in the Pensy for a couple weeks, watching motions and closing arguments.
I think both can be true, though. The trials happen for all the Death Eaters, but the Wizengamot was only invited for the big ones, for the special cases.
Yeah.
That might be true, too. But I think getting back to the question that was sort of brought up quickly earlier of, are there wizarding lawyers? It appears no, right? We have no evidence that anyone has the right to a lawyer, that anyone can have a lawyer. It does not appear to be the case, which might also speak to why the trials are so short.
Hold on. I'm trying to find what Dumbledore says.
He said defendant.
Let's see.
I'm pretty sure he uses a defendant of the case or whatever.
No, Dumbledore doesn't say anything about a right to a defense. I think he's arguing about the right to witnesses. Under the Wizengamot Charter of Rights, the accused has the right to present witnesses for his or her case. So there is some kind of guidelines.
Yes.
I would love to see that Wizengamot Charter of Rights, personally.
Here's a question, though. So I don't know exactly. I would assume the UK probably has something similar, but in the United States, you have an affirmative right to a court-appointed lawyer if you can't access a private one. Do we think that the wizarding world has that kind of affirmative right to defense, or do we think it's probably a bit more bare bones than that?
I don't see any evidence that anyone has the right to anyone defending them. I agree. I think that my guess is that the reason that Dumbledore is allowed to come and defend Harry is because Harry is a student at his school, and the question is whether or not he should be expelled. And he's sort of acting as a, character witness or whatever, saying that he should not be expelled. But I don't think that Harry...
I mean, presuming he has parents around, I would assume his parents would have been allowed in? Considering he's underage?
That's a good question. You would assume that, but you would also assume that...
Which then begs the question of Harry has a godfather, but obviously the ministry can't respect that because that godfather is Sirius. But shouldn't they have allowed someone who's, at least for the day, standing in as Harry's,
Right, like Mr. Weasley or someone.
Well, from the ministry's perspective, they're we would have to allow his legal guardian in, so the Dursleys. So if the Dursleys really wanted to be at the trial, I think the ministry couldn't keep them out. But I don't think anyone else has the right to be there. I do think, if you have a lawyer, you have the right to, have them be there, because otherwise, Fudge would have gotten Dumbledore out of there, if there wasn't, a right for Dumbledore to be there as a lawyer.
I don't think he's technically his lawyer. I think it's, because Dumbledore is the headmaster of his school, and it's a question of underage magic and being expelled, that therefore there is some right that Dumbledore has to be there or something like that. I don't know.
No, because he says witness for the defense. So Dumbledore is there to defend Harry, not as the authority.
Yeah,
figure.
but I feel like he could still be the witness to the defense and be in that role because he's the headmaster.
See, I think the problem that we're having is that it's A, Harry, and B, Dumbledore, and, Fudge could try to do a lot of things, but Dumbledore would just be like, no, I'm here, so...
That is true, so maybe we can't really use this case as proof of anything.
Yeah.
Because, Dumbledore's got style.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's basically the Elwoods of the Wizarding World.
Oh, yeah. And we saw what happened when Fudge, with multiple other wizards helping him, tried to fight Dumbledore. I mean, that didn't go very well for him.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't know. I mean, it would be kind of like if Fudge said, okay, security, get him out of here. I don't know who would... It might be one of those things where everyone would probably be a little reluctant to try that. I mean, they probably would try it if he ordered them to, but I don't know if Dumbledore laying out a bunch of Aurors in a packed room would be something that Fudge would want to be sort of the next big news story.
Well, he also can't be sure that he'd have the support. Like, the reason he's so paranoid is because, like, Dumbledore has a lot of support in the Ministry. And we even see that, like, not everyone is in Fudge's pocket because the Wizengamot does acquit Harry.
Definitely.
Despite Fudge's clear wishes and best efforts.
Definitely.
Charles, you actually had an interesting question about Crouch Sr. and Umbridge, where, like, sort of we know how corrupt the Ministry is, but would Crouch Sr. have kept Umbridge around the way that Scrimgeour did? And, like, I found this so interesting to think about, because, like, we so automatically dislike Crouch that we want to be like, yeah, he'd do all the bad things. But, like, the more I thought about it, the more I don't think Crouch Sr. would work well with Umbridge.
No.
Because...
I agree.
Yeah, Crouch Sr. is very, like, by the book. He likes the rules. Like, he's sort of, he can suspend the rules of due process, which, again, seem like a loose recommendation. But, like, generally, like, Crouch wants things to be by the book and to be done right and correct. Umbridge doesn't actually care about rules. Like, she's happy to skirt the rules to serve her own sadistic goals. Like, at Hogwarts, she doesn't so much want order as control. And so, like, I think Crouch, considering how inflexible he is about the rules, like, really wouldn't care for Umbridge, especially once it came out what she was doing in Order of the Phoenix. And we also don't have any indication that Crouch was a bigot like Umbridge was. So I'm gonna keep defending Barty Crouch Sr. And say no, that he would not keep Umbridge around.
I agree. This is maybe a little silly, but I also just, like, think that just personality-wise and, like, just, like, as people, I just don't see them getting along, as in, I think Crouch is, like, so practical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's so, like, the way he is described in Goblet of Fire is just, like, so precise. Like every, hair on his mustache is, like, cut to the precise right length. And, like, I think that Umbridge's brand of, like, girliness, like, oh, hem, like, cough, cough, maybe I misunderstood things, but, like, her just brand, I think, would get on his nerves. Like, I think he would just be annoyed by her. Mm-hmm. Like, even all else aside, I think he would find her annoying and wouldn't like spending time with her.
I agree with that.
I think for me, what it boils down to, and I would generally defend Crouch on a lot less stuff, but I'll defend him here because he seems to be, even Sirius, who otherwise hates him, seems to imply that Crouch's bigotry stops and starts with house elves, which, and we know from Sirius, from Ron, from the Weasley twins, from Hagrid, that there's a lot of wizards who have ignorant attitudes about house elves, but are not pureblood supremacists, don't have a dislike for Muggleborns. Dumbledore is one of the few that, seems to have a progressive attitude toward both groups, but Crouch is implied to actually be very anti-dark magic and anti-pure blood supremacy. That was kind of how it came off to me, and that's part of why he was so angry at his son. So it's a little bit hard for me to picture him liking Umbridge's attitudes and also kind of her penchant for dark magic. I'm not so sure he would like the I must not tell lies punishment. I think that might kind of...
Oh, he would not.
Yeah, it's hard for me to picture him being okay with that. So I think that probably Umbridge was kind of in the right place at the right time to get career advancements. It is a little bit unclear why Scrimgeour kept her around, because she seems to be kind of a political liability, unless it's like certain government jobs where she was basically unfireable. But we don't really get any indication of that. So yeah, I think Crouch Sr. and I think Umbridge would have had a very hard time coming up through the ranks under a Minister of Magic, Barty Crouch Sr.
Yeah. Also, in a further defense of Crouch Sr., and I don't know how I've gotten here, to push back against your house elf bigotry, I think we don't have evidence that he's actually as bigoted against house elves as it seems, because he's very shitty to Winky. And he shouldn't be that shitty to Winky, and very much not cool. But that said, the implication throughout most of Goblet of Fire is that he was shitty to Winky because she made him look bad, and he just wildly overreacted and was horrible to her. In actuality, she really, really she got his, neo-Nazi son out on the loose, let him get a wand, caused complete and utter chaos, nearly exposed the secret, nearly ended up with people killed. Winky genuinely really messed up at the Quidditch World Cup. While his response was horrible, I feel like it's a lot more understandable than if it was just Winky was running away and happened to get stunned. It's right. A bad look.
And also, Winky clearly, adores Crouch. And we do see, we don't have that much evidence of house elves, but of the 3 house elves that we really know much about, 2 out of the 3 hate their masters. So it's not a given that house elves are just being oh, my master is so great, I'll forgive anything. So it's clear that house elves care if their masters are nice to them or not. So that gives us the sense that maybe Mr. Crouch was very nice to Winky, and that's why she's so loyal to him.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely possible. I mean, Crouch is kind of one of those characters that in a lot of ways, we only kind of see at his worst moments.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't get that much, we just don't get that much indicator of what he's like under normal circumstances. I mean, Sirius seems to feel sorry for Barty Jr., but which could indicate, holy crap, if even Sirius feels sorry for him, his home life must have been really bad. Or it could be that Sirius is projecting his own issues with his own father onto the Crouches. We really don't know.
I think there's a lot of the latter. I think Sirius is yeah, he's a rebellious teenager, fighting against the man.
And I would add to that also, Azkaban. Sirius has been well, this was not fun.
Yeah.
And arguably no one deserves Azkaban, so.
Yeah. But yeah, honestly, I think we're just going to have a Crouch episode down the line, because this is really interesting.
That would be fun.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about the other punishments that we see in the Wizarding World? So we've talked about how you get sent to Azkaban for anything and everything, sort of based, and the length of the sentence is based on how bad it is. But we do actually see other punishments. We see financial penalties, right?
Yeah.
When Arthur Weasley is penalized for bewitching the Fort Anglia.
It's 50 galleons. I always struggle to imagine what galleons are to real money, but that seems like an alright sum. Because I think isn't a wand is 10 galleons, so 50 galleons, that seems like Seems like okay.
Yeah.
The one that sticks out to me as potentially a thing that doesn't really make that much sense, but is the sort of expulsion from the wizarding, not society as a whole, but the whole, Hagrid was, lost his wand. His wand was broken and he can no longer use magic. That always felt like a weird punishment.
It's so strict.
But it seems sort of it seems to be the only alternative to, we're not sending you to the soul-sucking dementors, but you also can't use magic anymore.
So, once you mentioned this, I went deep down the rabbit hole, because I've never thought as much about it as I perhaps should have. So first of all, what's actually more humane? Imprisonment in Azkaban or snapping the wand? Because, it sounds horrible, to snap the wand, but I guess sort of in terms of Muggle analogies, it would be kind of like, life under house arrest, where, you can still live somewhat comfortably, you just don't get to, do the thing, whether it be magic or, leaving home.
What's ridiculous about this is that necessarily this is a punishment being given to a minor, because it's expulsion from school.
Yeah.
So you are essentially condemning a minor to never being able to participate in magical society ever again, which is an extreme punishment, a very extreme punishment. So I don't think it should just be compared to Azkaban, because this is for a minor specifically. And
wait, you think it couldn't happen to an adult?
Well, we're never given any instances of when snapping your wand is a punishment for an adult. It's only ever given as a punishment for being expelled from school.
Oh, true.
And there are other options. It's you got expelled from Hogwarts. Why don't you just require the parents to homeschool them? Or if the parents aren't magical, have some sort of tutoring system. If it's some or some rehabilitation, and then they go back to Hogwarts later, or then they can apply to another school somewhere in a different country or something like that. It's really ridiculous, because it's not if a minor got expelled from a school in the Muggle world, they would just never go to school again and never be able to have a job and never be able to participate in society. They would go to another school. It's completely ridiculous.
Yeah. You know what else is completely ridiculous about this? How on earth can this be enforced? I started thinking about well, what are the loopholes? And I'm just yes,
all the loopholes all the time.
it is one enormous loophole. So for example, if you do this, first you have to alert every wand maker in the country to not give the person a new wand, because that could be a thing.
Outside of the country, we see Hagrid traveling.
And outside the country.
Yeah.
Right. So, assuming, there's, 3 wand makers in the UK, that's not so hard. But then, they could just go to Grigorovich. So, I wonder if countries have, treaties on this, kind of like we have extradition treaties, where, if you snap someone's wand, you alert all the wand makers in Europe, you can't give this person a wand. But then, you have to somehow let people know about this, right? Because, if you see Hagrid, with a wand, you need to know that, that's not okay, because, otherwise, what are you going to do? Just, ankle monitor them the whole time? So, you need to just, I guess, maybe have a database or a public announcement, or I don't know how that would work.
Yeah.
Then, also, you literally present your wand when you enter the Ministry of Magic. So are you just not allowed to enter the Ministry of Magic? What if you have business there? I
think part of the reason they present the wand is so that they can just, keep track of who is there and, what wands have got. I think if you don't have a wand, then you're not a threat to anyone, but, they might just identify you in a different way.
Okay, fair enough. I'll concede that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there's other visitors to the Ministry, going back to the...
goblins or...
No, right. Yeah, the all the beings, they were like, you're not allowed to have a wand. They're still clearly going to the ministry because there's a whole department just looking into that.
Okay, retracted. What's to stop someone from just learning wandless magic?
Yeah,
like,
so pointless.
I was thinking I'll go to Ouagadougou or whatever the African school is, and just take a few courses while I'm there.
Yeah,
like. I don't see how you could stop someone.
Yeah.
Another thing to consider is that in the Muggle world, extradition is very tricky in some circumstances. First of all, I don't know of any country that has extradition deals with every other country. Second of all, even in cases where you do have extradition with another country, and even when those countries are on very good relations, there can be a lot of issues, and countries often won't, even to close allies, won't just extradite somebody under any circumstances for anything, no parameters, etc. It would also explain, my sense is that Dumbledore has a general reluctance to expel students, regardless of house, and this could explain why. He may just hate doing it partly because the penalty is so severe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Going back to other countries, what's to stop someone from just traveling somewhere? I feel like, sort of this is what 99% of these kids would do, is be like, well, all right, I'm gonna go to Brazil and, let the UK try to enforce my snapped wand in Brazil. And it'd be annoying because you'd have to travel as a Muggle. So this punishment was probably much more effective before air travel was invented.
Yeah.
100 years ago it'd be like, oh, it's a problem. And now it's like, oh no, it's a whole 12-hour flight, and then the problem is solved.
I mean, I think the one thing that I've thought about a lot with this rule is that it is discriminatory towards Muggleborns, because for one thing, if you do underage magic at home, you are much more likely to be caught if you're Muggleborn. Those wizarding children can basically do whatever they want while their parents aren't there, while their parents are in a different room, and the ministry will never know. So Muggleborns are much more likely to be expelled. And then if you are expelled, it's a lot. You don't have as much connections to the magical world that you would even know as much about where to go to get these other wands, or your parents could just apparate to Brazil and get a wand for you or something like that, and enroll you in a different institution and all of that. And if you don't have the money to go travel somewhere else on airplane, you can't get the wand or go to a different school or whatever.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because it's almost like we're refusing you the right to an education if you do it to someone who's still going to school, which was the case with Hagrid. But even if you do this to someone who was, an adult, has already gone through Hogwarts, has his degree, whatever, it's such a wild thing to do. It's you're no longer allowed to use a wand. This is the foundation of your whole life, but okay.
Yeah.
Another issue that occurs to me is, Hagrid, arguably, some of the damage was mitigated by the fact that Hagrid seems to be resistant enough to magic and just so freaking big that he is able to really handle most wizards. Obviously not someone like Dumbledore or Voldemort, but he seems to be able to handle most wizards in a fight without the use of a wand. He can just punch them or wrestle them, whereas a wizard without giant blood, they, assuming that they actually totally abided by this rule and didn't go through one of the gazillion methods that we know they could get around it, assuming somebody totally stuck to and abided by the punishment, they would kind of be a walking target, because they wouldn't be able to defend themselves unless they learned wandless magic.
I mean, I think in that case, and to your point, Sophia, especially if it was a Muggle-born, I think they just rejoined the Muggle world. Sort of.
That doesn't stop a Death Eater attacking them, for example.
Yeah, but the thing is,
no.
it doesn't work that way because the magic is in you and it has to get out, is the sense that we get from, I mean, even if we don't go into Fantastic Beasts, like, you know, Harry as a young kid or like with his emotions or whatever. So the thing is, it is so like dumb, honestly, that they're refusing these kids wands, because wands are the safest way, I would imagine, to channel this magic. Then you don't have a bunch of like 14 or 15 year olds who are clearly like going through enough and being rebellious enough that they get kicked out of Hogwarts, and now they have all of these emotions that they can't even channel, that they're going to be like exploding everyone. Like it just is so dumb. Like it seems very not thought through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Could not agree more.
Yeah,
Yep.
I honestly think this is a first book type thing that wouldn't have happened if in like book 5. This is does this make sense in the
Yeah.
broader sense of this world? No, not really.
I mean, if we think about it within universe, you know,
agreed.
I think that's probably true. But if we think about it within universe, I mean, my guess is that this is a very old law, and has just never been changed. And that is something that happens a lot, actually. In the Muggle world, there are a lot of really bad laws that have just never been changed. And probably part of the reason this has never been changed is because I just don't think people get expelled from Hogwarts very often. And
Yeah.
I think partly because it's such an extreme punishment. And also I think this speaks to like a larger thing within the wizarding world that I think wizards, like, for a long time have just seen themselves as being completely under threat. They, even if it's not a state of emergency because of a wizarding war, they're always seeing themselves as under threat of muggles. So I think that's part of why their punishments can be so extreme, and I think especially maybe laws that were created a long time ago, when the Statute of Secrecy was like first being created, is they're saying, okay, if we have wizards who aren't abiding by the laws, who are doing underage magic, who are like breaking the Statute of Secrecy, who are putting us in danger, then like we need to neutralize that. Like we have to be strict about this. So I think that might be when the law was created, that they're like, okay, if these kids can't abide by the laws of the world, then they can't be part of the world, because it is so important that people abide by these laws, or else everyone's going to be in danger.
Yeah, the siege mentality seems to be very real in the wizarding world, and that's kind of, you know, it does sort of feel like, I mean, Salazar Slytherin was, you know, a bigot toward Muggleborns, but it feels like his bigotry was a bit more legitimately fear-based and sort of paranoia based on a siege mentality, whereas it comes off like later generations of anti-Muggleborn bigotry were just sort of more garden variety racial superiority attitudes, you know, but it does seem like historically the wizarding world has had very much a siege mentality. I think you put it very well.
I know we probably said we will keep the Hogwarts side of it out of this episode as much as possible, because it's such a tricky thing. But the whole expelling thing, just because we just talked about it, made me remember in Chamber of Secrets, after Harry and Ron come in with the flying car from Fort Anglia, and they're like, if you put one more toe out of line, we'll have to expel you. And I was like, sure, Dumbledore, as if you would expel Harry Potter.
Yeah, for sure.
We were like, well, back to the Dursleys. Can't be the savior of the wizarding world now. It just is what it is.
They are so lucky Harry doesn't realize how important he is. Because, like, if it was another kid being like, yeah,
if it's Draco Malfoy,
you
he would just be like... Yeah, I think the amount that expulsion is threatened at Hogwarts compared to what we know of people being expelled from Hogwarts, which is basically no one, shows me that this is just a scare tactic. This is what teachers say to students because they know it's really, really scary. But nobody really does it unless, like, in Hagrid's case, they think that one student is, like, actually murdering other students, and, like, opening up this chamber and all of that. So I think it's, pretty, I think most younger students don't realize that it's not actually going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think with Hagrid, it's probably a special case anyway, because I'm sure there's a lot of bigotry that played into his lack of a trial, I'm sure.
I was just thinking that.
And they were like,
And some of it may also be a Tippett versus Dumbledore thing.
And also, it was a long time ago, so it's just like different rules, like different types of punishment. I mean, even if we look at the Muggle world, punishment has, what is considered acceptable punishment has changed over, centuries and stuff.
True.
Yeah. But you know what punishment is still completely beyond the pale?
Yes.
Dementor's kisses.
I don't see the problem with them, Irvin. Are there any problems with that?
I mean, it depends if they ask for consent first. This is so beyond messed up. And like, Charles, this is more your area of expertise. So if you want to take it away, but just headline, Dementor's kiss, f***ed up.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there, so I think that the Dementors, the Wizarding world does not seem to have the death penalty, per se. Vernon asks about it and, implies that he wants them to do it to Harry. But the Wizarding world doesn't seem to have the death penalty. However, the Dementor's kiss is more brutal than an execution. Number one, because it's a form of torture that just goes on and on. And also because it's implied to permanently destroy someone's afterlife. Now, it's not clear how that works, because the Wizarding world is extremely vague about the afterlife. Nearly Headless Nick implies that someone or something is running it, although it's, again, so vague. But it does seem that the Dementor's kiss prevents you from sort of having a peaceful afterlife. Now, I think, for reasons I'm going to get into in a sec, I think that it is probably a metaphor for the death penalty in the Muggle world, but there are some parallels. Without getting too much, I'm not going to get, don't worry, everybody, I'm not going to get into the weeds with theology, but there is kind of some parallel with sort of the question about, does, that people talk about in religion, does anyone actually deserve eternal damnation? Is there something unacceptably cruel about an afterlife where somebody has just no chance at redemption or peace or anything like that? But I would say that it is a metaphor for the death penalty for a number of reasons. One thing that I think we have to look at with the context here is that when Harry Potter came out, historically, the US was not any more pro-death penalty than the UK was. I think at one time the UK probably had more capital offenses, but during the 90s, the US and the UK were going down opposite roads on this. The UK had not executed anybody in quite a while, but officially removed their last death penalty statutes. And I believe in it would have been 98, the year Chamber of Secrets came out, when the UK officially outlawed all forms of capital punishment. Now, what was going on across the pond in the United States was the use of the death penalty was actually getting ramped up. It had been reinstated, even though it's actually never been carried out, I don't think. It was reinstated in New York not too long prior to that, and in, I believe, 94, the United States government had passed a omnibus crime bill that actually expanded the number of federal federal capital crimes from 3 to 60. So at this point, when these books are coming out, the issue of capital punishment is very much a cultural difference between the US and the UK in a way that it had never been prior to that. And arguably 9/11 sort of accentuated those cultural differences, even further. But I think that if you look at the conversations that characters have about the Dementor's kiss, particularly Harry and Lupin, and particularly in the scene where Crouch Jr. gets kissed, the debates really do seem to parallel debates over the death penalty in historically Muggle UK and now more commonly in Muggle US. And I think that another point is that with both the sentencing of Buckbeak for something that was Malfoy's fault and the sentencing of Sirius to a Dementor, Buckbeak obviously gets sentenced to actual execution, but that and the sentencing of Sirius to the Dementor's kiss as punishment for something he didn't actually do, I think is sort of a critique of how the death penalty is applied, and also, kind of the risk of false positives and, unjust executions, even beyond just the simple morality of it. And then I'd argue that, the scene where Crouch Jr., who's one of the most unlikable characters, gets the Dementor's kiss, and everyone but Fudge is horrified, even Snape seems to be disturbed. I think that's really supposed to sort of emphasize that, even aside from the concern about how it's applied, that it's meant to be portrayed as immoral and sort of debasing everyone involved. We can get more into, into the weeds more if we want about Rowling's views on capital punishment and sort of how it's addressed at other points in the series. But I didn't want to take advantage by going on a 20-minute filibuster. So I kind of wanted to give sort of a brief rundown of why I think the Dementor's kiss is probably a metaphor for capital punishment. And then we can sort of go where everyone wants to go from there. Yeah.
I think that's a great argument. What I was thinking while you were saying that, and I don't want to get into this too much because I don't want to do spoilers for, but, we've done a lot of Strike episodes and talked about...
Yep, I was going to bring that up.
Harry Potter connected to the Strike series, and in book 4, Lethal White of the Strike series, there is a big theme of capital punishment, and I don't know how much to get into because I don't want to spoil things for people, but I think that is...
I'll do just a vague one, so this isn't like
go for
a plot spoiler or anything, but basically in Lethal White, gallows feature very prominently, and particularly the person who makes the gallows, and, exports them out into the world and everything, is cast as the villain, because they are, an instrument of torture and they are outlawed in the UK. So that's a very big plot point in Lethal White, where Jo is fairly unambiguous, where she's like, this bad person who is doing a bad thing. And this is one of those, US versus the civilized world dichotomies. Yep. That's really hard to wrap your head around as an American. I remember, and I might have brought this up before, but I was at a torture museum in Belgium a couple of years back. As one does. And among the torture museums, there was a gallows, which is considered an instrument of torture in Europe. And, there was a whole little plaque about how, it's used to kill people, yada, yada, yada. And then it was like, and can you believe in the year of our Lord, 2017, all of these countries still permit the use of the gallows at, this torture instrument. And the list of countries was, all third world countries. It was all some tiny ones in Africa, some in the Middle East, and then the United States. And we just stand alone here, in the Western world. Sort of all of Europe, I'm sure, Australia, everyone has just outlawed capital punishment. Whereas here, it's very much a debate. Like, I'm not going to say we as a society are, like, all gung-ho about it. Like, we're not Uncle Vernon, which, like, I love how hopefully he asks if they have a death penalty. But yeah, just, like, politically, there is such a chasm between the U.S. and the U.K.'s positions, like, on this issue.
Yeah, and in Lethal White, there's also a parallel, like, kind of unintentional consequence with the gallows, and it kind of parallels, I think, Crouch Jr. getting the kiss, and that you see different people's reactions to that unintended consequence, and like you see who is like, oh, not a big deal, and who is very disturbed by it.
Yeah. Like we should go into like the specific examples in the books, Charles, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff there. But Jo is like on the record opposing the death penalty. So in the Pottermore piece that she wrote about Dolores Umbridge, she was talking about the inspiration for Umbridge. So, someone she very clearly didn't like. And so she said, I've noticed more than once in life that a taste for the ineffably twee can go hand in hand with a distinctly uncharitable outlook on the world. I once shared an office with a woman who covered the wall space behind her desk with pictures of fluffy kitties. She was the most bigoted, spiteful champion of the death penalty with whom it has ever been my misfortune to share a kettle. A love of all things saccharine often seems present where there is a real lack of warmth or charity. So, like, without, saying it, I feel like Jo just said it, like, death, she views the death penalty as something indefensible. And I feel like that really comes through in her writing.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think when I did a podcast on this a couple of years ago, I honestly probably understated the case, even though I said that Harry Potter was low-key anti-death penalty, and honestly is, the more I look at it, and all this information and everything, I don't know that there's anything low-key about it, honestly.
It's pretty high-key.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get into the weeds, I'm curious, though, why do you think she went for Dementor's kiss as an analog instead of just talking about the death penalty? Because, like, I mean, you can kill wizards. Like, that's a doable thing.
I think it's because one of the big messages of her book, I mean, she talks a lot about death in this series, and obviously she comes down on the side of murder is bad. But a big message of the books is that death, like, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure, or whatever Dumbledore says, that death on its own is not the worst possible thing that can happen to a person, and that there is this message of sort of acceptance of death as part of life, and, that some things are worth dying for, and, like, all of that I think if it was just, oh, death penalty, like, this is such a horrible thing, I think it would miss some of the other messages that she's trying to send about, because, I mean, the soul is a huge part of the series, like, the whole Horcruxes, and, like, to have a soul that is, like, in one piece, and that is able to go on to the next adventure, and that, like, taking that away from someone, like, that's the biggest message of the series, is not death is bad because, and murder is bad. It's, it's important to, to be a whole person, like a good whole person, and to be able to keep your soul intact, even though all of our bodies, will decay eventually.
Yeah. That makes sense, because I feel like the Dementor's kiss is often referred to as, like, a fate worse than death in the books, and that framing makes a lot of sense. It was supposed to be even more explicit, because in the original outline for Order of the Phoenix, like the one that was released in History of Magic, we actually see that originally Bellatrix wasn't supposed to kill Sirius. Sirius was supposed to be, like, attacked by Dementors and would choose to die by going through the veil rather than being kissed by a Dementor. So Sirius was supposed to, be faced with the choice and actually make it.
Interesting. It's really interesting.
Don't we think that someone, I mean, we don't really see it, but someone who has been kissed by a dementor there's not much left for that person.
Yeah.
So I would probably argue that someone who has been kissed by a dementor is not going to live for much longer, probably anyway, because they may choose to end their life shortly after.
I don't even know that they have like the wherewithal to choose that.
I assume they were essentially like in a coma vegetal state type thing, but like no possibility of getting out, no possibility of like even understanding if someone's talking to them. Like none of the things that can be possible in comas otherwise. I think they are just
Yeah.
Like the way Lupin puts it is Harry's like, what? They kill? Oh no, said Lupin. Much worse than that. You can exist without your soul, as long as your brain and heart are still working. But you'll have no sense of self anymore, no memory, no anything. There's no chance at all of recovery. You'll just exist as an empty shell, and your soul is gone forever. Lost.
Yeah, and I mean, it also occurs to me, and again, this is a little speculative because it is the afterlife is so vague in this series. Conjuration 2025, I'm going to try to host a panel on that because I feel like that would be, afterlife in the wizarding world. But it seems like if you get kissed, and does anybody disagree that it seems like you can't peacefully cross over the way that you would normally if you died?
Agreed. Like there's nothing to cross over. Your soul's gone.
So you can't become a ghost and you can't cross over.
Yeah, I mean, I would take death over that too myself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really seems much more cruel than death penalty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's quite interesting that, I know this is Fantastic Beasts territory, but that we see a version of a death penalty there,
So I remember talking about it, and you're talking about like the completely asinine death potion crap in the first movie. And I remember I was talking about this with Lori Kim, and I was like, it is the stupidest thing I've like ever seen in connection to the wizarding world. I am including Cursed Child in that. Like, what the actual... Anyway, and she pointed out that basically the death potion is Joe's critique of, like, Americans. Like, this is how Joe views, like, the American stance on capital punishment, where it's just this completely nonsensical, like, needlessly terrible, needlessly, like, evil way of dealing with people. And, like, sort of the death potion crap is her analog for that, which, like, ouch, but
yeah, I mean, not gonna lie, when I saw that, and I saw it with friends, we walked out and we were like, well, tracks with what we think of America. So.
and as an American, I would say you are correct.
Right.
I think it I mean, I unironically love those films, more than most of the original Harry Potter films, because the original Harry Potter films messed up too much stuff in the books. But I think similarly, I think it sort of ties in with the fact that Wizarding America has more segregation with Muggles, which kind of has parallels to, the history of race in the two real world countries. I think it's trying to present Wizarding US as backward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of fits. But I can see the argument for that being stupid, and I understand that my overall take on those films is very mavericky.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm not going to argue that they're better than most of the Harry Potter films, because that bar is in hell.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, not hard to step over. But, yeah, still not a fan. So, the interesting thing about the Dementor's kiss for Crouch Jr., which is the only one that we see, is that, like... It barely even qualifies as the death penalty. Like, sort of the way that there is a decree issued where, like, Sirius Black, this horrible wanted mass murderer, if he's caught, he will be, like, put to death, is like, explicitly announced by the ministry and is sort of, like, within the bounds. What happens with Crouch Jr. is basically an extrajudicial killing, because, like, there's no... trial, there's no announcement, there's no nothing, just sort of the Dementor swoops in and does it, and like, I don't know, maybe some of you know more about relevant laws and such, but like, what would be the relevant analog of the, like, well, a life-imprisoned criminal who we think is dead anyway, appears to have broken out of prison and been not dead and killed people. So, like, there isn't a wanted dead or alive warrant out for him because he's presumed already dead. So, like, can it be defended that the Dementor's Kiss even is capital punishment versus just, like I said, extrajudicial killing?
This seems more in line with police shootings in the U.S. of people who are often completely innocent, or at the very least have not been tried for any crime. And that the police generally don't have much accountability for that. So I think this is actually a pretty good analog for that. So is it the death penalty? Not in the same way, but it's similar of, like, the law is deciding to kill someone, and in this case without even any sort of trial.
That's a really good way of thinking about it, actually. I like that.
Definitely. Yeah, I thought that was kind of where my brain went to. I think that was pretty much the best possible analysis. I do think, though, that it sort of is meant to underscore that whether you're talking about killing or the Dementor's Kiss, that I think it's trying to I do think it's also a critique of the death penalty in the sense of trying to push back against the idea of, well, this person is really bad, therefore they deserve this, therefore it's okay if this happens to them, even though it's completely unnecessary. I do think that there is still a critique of capital punishment there, but it also definitely does remind me of police killings, where, I mean, in some cases, and I think, listeners may know, some of the ones I'm talking about, but, like, sometimes you'll have a case where the person is handcuffed and they, or on the ground or both, and they get killed, and so I do think it's kind of pushing back, I think it's very much pushing back against the sort of just desserts framing.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I think the phrasing, like, I think McGonagall is the one who said that Fudge insisted for his own protection that a Dementor be brought with him. And I think that's often the excuse that police officers give, is like, oh, I was protecting myself. And in this case, it's like Crouch, it's not like Dumbledore just, like, left Crouch, like, completely in his right mind, completely unbound. He has made sure that Crouch is neutralized. So it's clearly a ridiculous argument on Fudge's part, and we see that even with the fact that Crouch is not actually of any danger, the Dementor still goes in and gives the kiss.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And also, I mean, it seems certainly a choice not to just bring a damn Auror.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's already a choice
this all
to
just
bring
got,
a
like,
Dementor inside a school.
Yeah.
Because
this all just got, like, so much grosser and more horrible. Like, sort of the more we talk about it, I was like, Fudge is awful.
Because I never really understood how much control the Ministry has over the Dementors, because they seem to have some
Not
control.
yeah.
But it also seems to be a case of, well, these things exist, so we're just using them for potentially our own benefit. But you just took a Dementor into a school where you could have bumped into however many students and other people, and how much control do you really have over a Dementor at a school that is, justifiable in a lot of distress at the moment, so emotions are probably going to run rampant everywhere. So
I don't think it's implied to be a magical control of Dementors. I think it's political control. Like, sort of the Dementors are sentient, and the Ministry, like, agrees to work with them and be in charge in exchange for, giving them free reign in some areas.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought until you said that, Aureo, that, like, okay, Cedric Diggory has just died, so all of these students are already going to be upset, miserable, depressed, all of those other things, in shock, and then you're bringing in a creature that is going to make all of that worse? Like, that's just sadistic. Like, how could he have not thought about that? That's so cruel.
Yeah, and it could have easily, and I'm about to give a theory that I did not make this up. This is not my theory, but I've heard it before, and it may make you guys dislike Fudge even worse. But, Fudge was taking a big risk, because if the Dementor had accidentally kissed Draco Malfoy, he might have had a crazy situation where Lucius and Dumbledore actually teamed up against him. But I do think it does seem like there's something to the theory. If you think about how Fudge benefits from Barty Crouch getting kissed, all of a sudden there's one fewer person that can be interrogated and back up Harry's story. So you do wonder if Fudge was halfway hoping it would happen.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that begs the question of how much did Fudge know before going to see Crouch Jr.? Like,
and how much did he suspect?
Did he know enough that he would know how dangerous Barty Crouch Jr.'s testimony could be or not? But I'd say, yeah, if he did suspect, then that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it's not hard to combine those facts. I say that very slowly because Fudge is not exactly painted as the most intelligent man.
Exactly.
But we can assume that Fudge knows a little bit of what went down the previous school years. And, Harry Potter vanished, another boy vanished. They come back, only one of them is alive. It's not difficult to, conclude that something very evil has happened, and who's the most evil, at least in this country. And that Dumbledore's probably kept banging on of, he's not dead, he's not dead, he's not dead. It's not difficult to draw some conclusions, I'm trying to say. It's just Fudge doesn't strike me as the person to necessarily get to this point very quickly.
Right. Could someone bring up, the conversation of, when Fudge first gets into the hospital wing and, what is said? Because I'm curious.
Yeah, I have it. So, what are they shouting about? So the first thing is, regrettable but all the same, Minerva, Fudge is saying. And you should have never brought it inside when Dumbledore finds out.
She's very right.
Yeah.
She's very right. So they get to the hospital wing, and where's Dumbledore? Fudge demanded. Because Dumbledore actually told Snape to tell Fudge he'll be at the hospital wing in a half hour's time.
Mm-hmm.
So Dumbledore comes in, and he's like, what's happened? Why are you disturbing these people? And then, Minerva, I'm surprised at you. I asked you to stand guard over Barty Crouch. There's no need to stand guard over him anymore, Dumbledore, she shrieked. The minister has seen to that. When we told Mr. Fudge that we had caught the Death Eater responsible for tonight's events, said Snape in a low voice, he seemed to feel his personal safety was in question. He insisted on summoning a dementor to accompany him into the castle. He brought it up to the office where Barty Crouch, and McGonagall interjects, I told him you would not agree. I told him you would never allow Dementors to
But what
set
does
foot.
Fudge say, after, when he's making an excuse for it, he said something like, from what I hear, he's, what does he claim he's heard already? I think he says something.
Oh, right. So Dumbledore says he cannot give evidence about why he killed those people. Why he killed them? Well, that's no mystery, is it? He was a raving lunatic. From what Minerva and Severus have told me, he seems to have thought he was doing it all on you-know-who's instructions. There it is.
Yes.
There it is.
Okay, then he had the information.
Good catch.
Yeah. Oh, that is a compelling theory.
That is very compelling.
I'm glad you guys like it. Yeah, it's dark, but I kind of like it. I like the theory.
There were a lot of really, really compelling theories laid out before Deathly Hallows that Fudge is much more of an evil mastermind than, anyone gave him credit for. Sort of the way he engineered Sirius's capture and Pettigrew's escape, the way he was the first on the scene when that happened, sort of the way he ignores Voldemort in Order of the Phoenix, the way he gets Crouch Jr. out of the way. Like, you could very easily, like, paint a tale where Fudge is really an evil mastermind behind the scenes. Or alternatively, that Lucius is the evil mastermind using Fudge for his corrupt ends.
Definitely.
I have some of those essays linked somewhere. I'll need to, like, pull them up when we do our Cornelius Fudge episode. But yeah, oh wow, this really kind of changed how I look at the whole thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm so glad.
Oh.
It is quite interesting because if you think about the way that we're first introduced to Fudge is such like an uncle-like nice person, and that gets peeled away almost immediately. Well, not immediately, but it gets peeled away to a degree in the same book. So, you know, he like rescues Harry.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, what do you mean? There's no punishment. It's all good. You just, you know, we just don't send people to Azkaban for blowing up dams. But then same year, he's like, yeah, Dementors are absolutely needed at a school, which, you know, we almost instantly learned that Dumbledore's very against that. So we already know that this is probably not the right thing to do. And then the next thing that happens in that same year is the execution of Buckbeak. And where Harry even bumps into Fudge again and tries to you know, in a last desperate effort, tries to convince Fudge that this is not the right thing to do. And we already can see that Fudge is very much like, oh no, scary beast, we need to kill it. And that all happens within the same book before we see Fudge get darker and potentially more evil mastermindy in the next book and definitely in the fifth book.
What's interesting is we're actually introduced to him in book 2.
Yeah.
With him coming to arrest Hagrid. So it's like, but in that way, it feels more like, oh, you know.
Duty calls. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't feel, it's more like, oh, duty calls. Like, and then, like, Harry's already a little bit suspicious when he first meets Fudge by, like, how light his punishment is for blowing up his aunt, because that was his first introduction. It was, like, him arresting Hagrid. But he does sort of still think, like, oh, he seems like generally a good guy, like, maybe doesn't always make the right decisions, but, like, generally a good guy, and that definitely gets peeled back.
Right, like a bumbler who makes bad decisions occasionally, but, like, essentially well-meaning. I feel like that's sort of the difference, is Fudge is, like, comes off as well-meaning if messed up. And actually, so I'm looking at the passage again, to your guys' point. So once Fudge says he's been responsible for several deaths, but he cannot now give testimony, Cornelius, said Dumbledore. He was staring hard at Fudge, as though seeing him plainly for the first time. So I wonder if Dumbledore is sort of putting 2 and 2 together and realizing, like, wait, like, is he not just, you know, an ineffectual bumbler? Like, I wonder if Fudge sort of had the same theory like you did, Charles, where he's like, what if he's actively, like, evilly masterminding things?
You know, Irvin, that's so smart, because I had always read that as Dumbledore seeing Fudge clearly, because he's like, oh wow, he was willing to just, like, have the Dementors kiss this man before even having any sort of trial or any sort of questioning. Like, he's clearly much more evil than I realized. But the thing is, there's precedent for that. Like, the Dementors were supposed to kiss Sirius as soon as they found him.
Right.
So I did, like, now that you point that out, that would not be enough to shock Dumbledore. So I think the fact that he's staring at him and being like, oh, I have never seen you properly before is, because he's like, this seems strategic.
Yeah. Like, I always read it as sort of like Dumbledore can't believe how paranoid and stupid he is. But yeah, that's not as compelling a reading as this one, because, like, we have evidence that Fudge is paranoid and stupid. Like, that wouldn't shock Dumbledore as much.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had my mind blown, like, to this level on the podcast.
I don't think we can recover from this.
I'm proud that I'm proud to have blown you guys' minds.
Yes.
Well done.
You should be. You should be. It's not as easy as some people make it out. So, moving away from Fudge the Evil Mastermind, which will be coming to a podcast episode near you later this year, let's go back to the Dementor's Kiss in Prisoner of Azkaban, the one that's decreed that Sirius will get it. I kind of want to talk about Lupin's conversation with Harry about the Dementor's Kiss. Because I feel like it's sort of as close as Jo comes to spelling out her position on capital punishment within the text. And it also, very unusually, comes from a non-Dumbledorian source, where it's Lupin. So it's a very quick exchange, where, Lupin says that, they've said he's going to get the Dementor's Kiss, and Harry thought of Black. He deserves it, he said suddenly. You think so, said Lupin lightly. Do you really think anyone deserves that? Yes, said Harry defiantly. For some things. And first of all, snaps for Lupin, when he's on in Prison of Azkaban, he's so good. Because, this was perfect where, I feel like if he'd come out and, said, well, Harry, that's wrong. How could you say that? It would never come across. Instead of, questioning Harry and sort of letting him think it through, I feel like is a very good approach and very effective. Yeah.
A great teaching technique. And it is so interesting, I don't know, thinking about how they've both lost so much because of Sirius, or in their eyes because of Sirius, but that they're coming from it from these two different standpoints. It's showing that it's not just someone who is not affected by the crime is oh, well, they shouldn't be killed, or in this case, worse than killed. It's they're both extremely affected by this crime, but they both have two different feelings about it.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of, there's a group, I think it's called Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation or something. It's essentially people who all have family members that have gotten murdered that are still anti-death penalty. It kind of reminded me a little bit of that, because Lupin lost his best friend as a result of, we think Sirius turns out to be Pettigrew. And it's interesting because Lupin later arguably doesn't act in line with those values when he wants to kill Peter, but I think that he's at his best here. And I think the question of, does anybody really deserve this? It does kind of go back to the question of number one, is there any scenario under which somebody deserves such horrific a punishment? And again, you can apply this to, so many things like we've alluded to, but then it also kind of gets into there's almost a two-pronged question of then, even if somebody deserves it, is there something immoral or even debasing to the people carrying out the punishment about actually doing it? Are there problems with that sort of just desserts framework? And yeah, I think that Lupin, to your point, Irvin, really is at his best in that scene. He is the most in line with his values that I think we ever see him in the text. And I think that very much is a position that the narrative is endorsing. And it's interesting because from what I I cross-checked the scene in the book and the scene in the film, and Harry seems to be a lot less gung-ho about killing Sirius when he finds out that Sirius killed his parents than he is in the film. The whole thing about I'm going to kill Black. I don't think that's in the book, is it?
I think he does say he he says he wants to go after Sirius. I don't remember. Sophia, Aureo, feel free to chime in. I don't remember if he says he wants to kill him. I know in Half-Blood Prince he says he wants to kill Snape. And Hermione is really, Harry? But I can't remember the exact phrasing in Prisoner.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
After he's overheard the conversation in the Three Broomsticks.
Because I thought the line was, he wanted to do something to Sirius, but wasn't sure what, or something like that.
So
I could be wrong.
in the Shrieking Shack, when like Sirius mentions his father, he wants his wand back, not to defend himself, but to attack, to kill. But so that's very heat of the moment. After the 3 broomsticks, so first he thinks that they don't affect him. The Dementors don't affect Sirius, and he's bothered by that. And so the next day... so what are you saying, said Ron, looking very tense. You want to kill Black or something? Don't be silly, said Hermione in a panicky voice. Harry doesn't want to kill anyone, do you? And Harry doesn't answer, and then says, like, but Malfoy knows, and they get distracted.
Okay.
Yeah. So Harry never does express that sentiment.
They had him emoting a lot more in the movie.
Mm-hmm. He was their friend.
Okay, part of me thinks that... Okay, part of it is, like, heat of the moment in the Shrieking Shack that Lupin changes his mind and wants to kill Peter. But I think also part of it is, like, I think it makes a difference to him, Sirius versus Peter being the villain. I think none of them ever liked Peter as much as they liked Sirius. And I just think that, like, he sees Sirius as much more human than he sees Peter.
Interesting.
That's very possible. I mean, I've heard the fan theory that the Marauders always kind of may have not respected Peter as much, or picked on him a little bit, or sort of considered him a hanger-on. It's so hard to tell because we see so little flashbacks with them, and also we don't really get an unbiased account, but that definitely could be it. I mean, it does feel a bit like Peter was the fourth wheel. It's also possible, honestly, I wonder if Peter was mostly James's friend that they put up with because James liked him, because I've seen that dynamic in real life in certain social circles, and it would explain why Sirius and Lupin don't seem to care about Peter that much, but James was willing to make him the secret keeper.
But Sirius suggested making him the secret keeper.
Oh, so. You're right. That's a good point.
Only because they didn't respect him enough to think that he was, like, that Voldemort would think that anyone would make him the secret keeper.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, to me, it's just proof of their lack of respect for him.
But to your point about Harry and Pettigrew, I think part of it is that he's had time to sit with it. I think sort of after Lupin says that, I think Harry sort of has, like, a good long think about it for, like, 6 months. And that's why he's sort of a little past that in the Shrieking Shack.
Right. I was thinking more about Lupin's switch than Harry's.
So Lupin, it's actually interesting, because Lupin's position on the Dementor's kiss is not his position on killing people. Like, those are very different positions. Like, he thinks Dementor's kiss is unacceptable and beyond the pale, but he seems very down with killing people when necessary, because there's not only the Shrieking Shack scene, there's also the part in Deathly Hallows where, after the Battle of Seven Potters, Lupin's like, Harry, like, you gotta, like, shoot to kill, like, we're in a war, like, why are you not trying to kill Death Eaters? So, yeah, for Lupin, I think, there is a very big delineation between murder and the kiss, and he has different feelings about one than the other, and this is fascinating to me.
And Harry is the opposite by the end. He says, no, don't kill him, we'll give him over to the Dementors. And Lupin and Sirius agree to that, because they decide it's Harry's decision. But it is interesting that Lupin is like, killing is fine, Dementor's not fine. Harry's like, oh, no, you can't kill him, but Dementors are fine.
I think that there is potentially partially a thing of Harry is still 13 and believes in a justice system that works, and the other two maybe know better.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes and yes. So this is actually the part about Charles's panel at Conjuration that blew my mind. Because, like, I've struggled with the whole, like, Harry stopping Sirius and Lupin, and it's like, well, but they're throwing him to the Dementor, so is that okay? Do we believe in the Ministry? Like, what's okay? So, like, Charles, feel free to, like, correct me or cut me off if I'm butchering what you said, but I, like, went back to my notes on the panel. And so, basically, like, the important thing isn't the result of, like, you know, does Pettigrew end up dead, you know, or does he end up kissed or whatever. Like, the important thing isn't that. The important thing is the process. Like, what's not okay is the extrajudicial killing. Like, Sirius and Lupin are essentially meting out vigilante justice. It's based in emotion. It's not based in, you know, what's right and what. And so basically that's not okay. Like, sort of however many superhero shows we watch and however cool and satisfying it looks, like, it's not okay to just kill someone without due process. And so the right thing to do is give Peter to the Ministry where he will presumably, because he is young and optimistic, receive due process.
A 10-minute trial.
That's... Right, and so that is the right thing to do. So, yeah, and Charles, tell me if I completely butcher that, but I just remember, like, feverishly writing that to the panel. I was like, it finally makes sense.
So I think that's, and I really appreciate the plug, you know, plugging the panel and our commentary, and, you know, I'm very honored, you know. I think that it's a combination of that. I think that's a big part of it, but I also think there's another point, which is that whether Harry, Lupin, or anybody else approves of the Dementor's kiss, it's kind of out of their control. So they are, you know, it's sort of like, for purposes of analogy, you know, I would like to think if somebody killed my mom, that I would be able to, like, have enough frame of mind to be like, okay, I still don't want them executed. But if I handed the killer over to the police, I would understand that it might be out of my control whether they got executed, and I hopefully would not be happy about it, but I wouldn't necessarily feel guilty because I was not the one making the decision. I think that Harry is kind of realizing in that moment that, okay, we can't really control what the Ministry does, but we shouldn't be willingly choosing to kill somebody when it's not absolutely necessary. And if the Ministry does that, maybe, you know, does the kiss, it might be wrong, but it's out of our hands. You know, I think it's a combination of what you just said and that sort of, they really can't control what the Ministry does, but they don't want to be culpable for doing it themselves. I think that that's kind of a big part of it. And I don't know if Harry was clearly thinking that he would get the kiss or not, but I think it's a multi-pronged thing, and I honestly, I really appreciate the compliments from the panel.
Well, and I think also on the panel, y'all mentioned that Harry, coming from the Muggle world, like, may have learned about due process, like, and really he was 11, so, like, I don't know how much is imparted in elementary school, but, like, living in the world, he's like, oh, when someone commits a crime, there's, like, a trial, and then someone decides they're guilty, and then things happen. And so he may still, like, expect that, and think that's the way to do it, whereas wizards and due process is, you know, a tenuous connection at best.
Yeah, I think that it definitely... I think that's a very good point, and I also think it's not super certain that Peter would get the kiss because the nature of the Sirius Black case was so emotionally charged because it happened so close. The original publicity around the case was so close to the fall of Voldemort that I guess Peter would probably get the kiss. But I'm not sure that Harry is thinking, okay, he's definitely going to get it, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it isn't, because part of it is like, oh, Sirius, like, it's not like Sirius was given the kiss for the crimes he committed. He was theoretically going to get the kiss because he then escaped from Azkaban and tried to, in their minds murder Harry.
Right. He's wanted, kissed, or alive, basically.
Yes. So for Peter, he committed the crimes that Sirius was originally imprisoned for, but he did not, after that point, then try to murder anyone else, and has just been in hiding. So theoretically, he might just go to Azkaban for life like Sirius was supposed to.
Oh, and I think, wasn't there something where Harry specifically said, if he can go to Azkaban, if anyone deserves that place, he does?
Yeah. So I think it's not... I think he does not assume that Peter is getting the kiss. And it's a good question of, do Sirius and Lupin assume that Peter is getting the kiss? I don't know. Like, I think Sirius is in a frame of mind where he doesn't care either way. That's my own personal thought. Maybe that's not true. I think Lupin maybe is hoping for a fair trial, or like thinks there'd be a fair trial if Dumbledore is on. Like, he knows that Dumbledore will be on their side, and so I think he trusts Dumbledore to get Peter a fair trial.
Yeah. Well, and also to the point about escaping Azkaban, they would reveal that Peter's an animagus. Right. So then, like, you could make, like, really, really tiny bars that a rat can't get out of.
Yes. Or just have a bunch of, cats and birds of prey and stuff parked right outside.
Yeah. You know what? Forget the Dementors. Crookshanks will be the prison warden.
Yes.
Yeah, no, honestly. Unfortunately, I do have to leave to get to my doctor's appointment, but this has been a great discussion.
Bye.
Bye, Sophia.
So actually, I wanted to ask you guys, and, I don't know the answer. Is there a level of corruption at the ministry, say, when it was the Death Eater ministry in Deathly Hallows, where giving Peter over to the authorities in Prisoner of Azkaban becomes not the right choice? Because, it's very clearly portrayed as the right choice when Harry does it, but would there be a circumstance where that wasn't the case? Where, absolving yourself of the responsibility isn't the right thing to do?
I want to let Aureo go first, but my answer is going to be yes with an asterisk.
Okay.
I need to clarify the question. So, but are you sort of saying, is there a moment in time where you can't trust the ministry to basically follow through with what they're supposed to be doing?
Right. Where basically, the choice should be a different one. Where, Sirius and Lupin have Pettigrew, at Wand Point, and Harry says, no, don't kill him, but giving him over to the authorities is not the right move.
I mean, I guess for me, it would always be in that moment of time when you're already not trusting the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But then I don't think you would actually consider it as an option, because you're already not trusting the ministry for anything else. Which I think is probably only the point when Voldemort takes over the ministry. Because even before, even in the year where, in Order of the Phoenix, when Fudge and the ministry are clearly being difficult and
corrupt AF.
Yes. I still think you could expect with a case as serious as this, well, pun intended, as this one is, that there would be enough people in the ministry that would want to follow the process. Thinking of Madame Bones, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That I think you could expect that it would work. It's more sort of around. Why would you hand over a Death Eater to be processed by Death Eaters?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that certainly at the point of the ministry being Death Eater controlled, it would not be a good idea. But I think there are certain alternatives to either killing somebody yourself or handing them over to the authorities, because I think that you can also, that there often would be options where you could somehow quarantine the person yourself, put them maybe in like sort of section them off somewhere in Hogwarts. I mean, Hogwarts may not be the best, example because there's kids there, but have some place where you yourself are sort of holding them, but you're not handing them over. I think that there's definitely options besides, just sort of the rock and a hard place.
Right.
I think that, and it's worth noting that Harry gives Voldemort, and I think Dumbledore would have agreed with this, but Harry gives Voldemort a remarkable degree of opportunity to essentially, even though he knows he's not going to take it, to surrender and essentially be taken alive. Because Harry essentially warns Voldemort in the climax of Deathly Hallows, we've got you dead to rights, you've lost, you need to start trying really hard at some remorse right now. If you try to use the Elder Wand, it's going to kill you. He could have just let Voldemort immediately try to use the Elder Wand and just laughed when it backfired and killed him, but he actually did give Voldemort one last opportunity at mercy right there, when I think a lot of people, that would have never crossed their mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are pretty much, unless you're in a fight with someone right then, and they are an active threat right in that moment, I think there would always be alternatives to essentially either handing them in or doing a vigilante execution yourself.
Yeah. So, actually, I want to expound on the thing you said about how, you can neutralize people. So, I struggle so much with the idea of, self-defense in the wizarding world, because you have completely effective ways of neutralizing people in the wizarding world that, we don't have in the Muggle world. Basically, in the Muggle world, if a lunatic who is, 7 feet tall comes at you swinging a very large, sharp knife, there is very little you can do to stop him that is non-violent.
Yeah.
In the wizarding world, sort of whatever crazy, evil, dark magic is being cast, you always still have the option of Expelliarmus, Stupefy, Petrificus Totalis, which are, no less effective or doable than using lethal force would be. So, I don't quite get how killing in self-defense would be as permissible in the wizarding world, considering they have such effective defensive techniques.
I think it isn't, for exactly those reasons.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I honestly view it a bit differently so it does seem like, and some of this honestly may just be a UK versus US thing, I would have to sort of cross-check the self-defense laws there, because I don't know if the self-defense rights are as broad in the UK as they are here, but there does seem to be kind of an attitude where in the wizarding world where they do seem to treat it sometimes as an affirmative duty for anyone who's attacked to use the minimal force possible. I think one reason I'm a little more skeptical of that being reasonable is that most of the non-lethal options are blockable, whereas Avada Kedavra, it's harder to cast in a lot of ways, and you can block it by things like statues, or you can dodge it, but it does seem to be, by some metrics, more effective. And I can sort of see why somebody would be hesitant to use, something like Expelliarmus, because it can be blocked more easily. But then there's also reasons why every Death Eater doesn't start every fight with Avada Kedavra, like the concentration that's required and the number of syllables and things like that. But it's also there's not really, there's not another spell that starts with Avad, I don't think. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of why, one of my kind of, hotter fandom takes is, I think I mentioned this in notes, I'll defend the use of Sectum Sempra because Harry had tried other non-lethal stuff, or not non-lethal, non-violent, and it wasn't really working. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of I mean, honestly, I think that it does seem like the wizarding world is stricter about self-defense, but I'm not sure if the non-lethal options are as much of a silver bullet, no pun intended, as they might be.
That's fair. You know what? That actually makes a lot more sense with the whole Crouch Senior giving Aurors the power to kill. Because, like, I always assumed before today that Aurors were always allowed to kill in self-defense, and that Crouch just gave them, like, permission to kill Death Eaters in combat, even if, like, it wasn't a life-saving last resort. But, like, the way you say it, where, like, actually it's much harder to not kill them if you're trying to neutralize them, that actually makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, if we are doing the differences culturally, it definitely is much stricter here than it is in America.
Mm-hmm. That was my impression.
Yeah.
We also don't give our cops the same level of equipment.
Mm-hmm. That was my sense also. And I also, we are a very wealthy country that spends very little money on police training. You know, make of that what you like. Did you know, Aureo, that it's typically about 5 or 6 months of police training before you're on the street with a gun? I think.
I did not know that.
I think we can fact check that. I'm sure if I'm wrong, somebody is going to really, ream me, like one of the listeners is going to ream me out. But I remember looking that up, and I think it's 5 or 6 months, and they were specifically saying that's unusual for a wealthy, industrialized country.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's minimum 3 years here.
Okay, I think that slightly depressing note is probably a good one to wrap on, because it has been 3 hours. Yeah. So, you know what? Let's end on a more uplifting note, shall we?
Please. Yes,
let's
yes.
play some music so we can all feel better. So today, playing at the pub's jukebox is the song "Ministry of Magic" by the band of the same name. Where we are just getting a promise of the Ministry's justice. Wouldn't that be comforting? As the song goes, welcome to the Ministry, we're all the justice that you need.
You're allowed to dream of a better ministry.
Yes. Yes.
So have a listen.
Please enjoy this song. The phone ride won't be long. Put your ID on. Our next stop is Mom. The Ministry would like to thank you for coming. Enjoy your stay with us today. We want to wish you all the best. Welcome to the Ministry. We're all the justice that you need. This way to registration. Don't mind our interrogation. We are order from chaos. Why must you run? Your time has just begun. We are the Ministry of Magic. There's no escape. We've locked the doors. You're never gonna walk again. Welcome to the Ministry.
Well, that's a good tune. Thank you so much, Charles, for visiting us today at the Three Broomsticks. I think I speak for all of us of saying that it was excellent to have you and a great topic to discuss today.
Happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Charles, this episode lived up to, my wildest dreams when I talked to you in November. This was absolutely fantastic.
I am so glad to hear that. I can't tell you how happy that makes me.
Good. Well, I will see you in November, and I'm sure we'll have you back on one day.
Is there anything people can find you online, or do they have to come to Conjuration?
Which they should.
They are welcome. Yes, they absolutely should come to Conjuration. So, Facebook name Charles Boyd. It's a common name, but look for the guy who resembles a younger version of Hopper from Stranger Things and is posing with John Lewis in his profile pic. Substack, Charles O'Halloran Boyd, SoundCloud, Podcast Minority of One, Instagram, lowercase H&G History Guru 75, and Twitter at capital M, capital O, Minority of 175. And I'm sure that the link will be posted.
Yes, we'll make sure to link to all of those.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we also want to offer a huge thanks again to Shruka, who bought us this round of drinks at the Three Broomsticks. Yay!
Thanks, Shruka.
Thank
you, Shruka. Those ice drinks were very needed today.
Yes.
Listeners, if you'd like to buy us the next round, you can head on over to patreon.com/3broomsticks with the numeral 3 to sign up. Keep an eye out for all the epic bonus content coming your way there. And you can also help by rating and reviewing us all over the internet, telling your friends, telling your acquaintances, your relatives, whoever you encountered this summer. Word of mouth is a big help, and we really love to see it.
And if you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. And our sorted handles and our email address can be found in the episode description or on our website. And our website is 3broomstickspod.com with the 3 spelled out. On our website, you can join us in the comments, discuss with us about the episode, anything else you want to tell us. You can also submit a topic. So if you have a great idea of what we should be talking next, let us know. And we always link to the many, many essays that usually Irvin or Sophia have written. So, or for our strike guests, all the doctors that we always have on, and all of the many, many works. So it's always worth coming to our website, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And listeners, next time we meet at the Three Broomsticks, it'll be a slightly lighter topic. We're going to be discussing the last of the titular chapters in the series, which is Deathly Hallows, Chapter 22. You guessed it, Deathly Hallows. And with that, I've been Irvin, Sophia's been Sophia.
And I'm Aureo. Thank you for listening. See you next time in the Three Broomsticks.
Cheers!
Give me big old buckets of butter beer. Give me big old barrels of butter beer. Give me the drink I love so dear. And another round for my friend right here of the sweet old butter beer.
This episode of The Three Broomsticks was edited by Patrick Musilek. The theme song was written and performed by the Faithful Sidekicks. Make sure to check them out at thefaithfulsidekicks.com.
Thank you.
So let's just get started then.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. We were talking about.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I lost a place in the dock if we had one.